Hello and welcome to Decomposing Worm, a worm analysis podcast. That's Clarence. He's the first-time reader and literary expert.
And that was Matias. He's read the story before.
In this 12-episode series, we're using critical theory to explore the superhero web serial Worm from a high-level perspective, covering Worm in 6 300,000-ish word chunks.
Mm-hmm. And today is part 2 of book 4, Perspectives. So here we'll be applying literary theory to Worm, kind of combing through arcs 18 through 22 with several lenses this week. Not, I wouldn't say like a completely kaleidoscopic collection I have accumulated, but it's like a bit of a weaving of several of them, and then there'll be like a nice dip into rhetoric from Matias.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's a great introduction to it. So as usual, if you haven't read arcs 18 through 22, please do, because this is a full spoilers discussion. And of course, if you haven't listened to the overview episode, I also recommend that. That said, it is 4 hours, so if you skipped it, I understand.
Perfectly acceptable.
We also released a bonus episode last week because our schedule has been a bit wonky, and we are now switching to a bi-weekly schedule. So in 2 weeks will be the next episode rather than next week. But to make up for abruptly changing the schedule, we did an episode on fight scenes. So if you haven't listened to that, it's there for you. But all right. So as usual, we are going to do our character studies at first, then we'll do our essays, and in between we'll have some smaller bits of discussion before we end the show.
And I mean, obviously, full disclosure again, we don't claim our expertise to be official or fancy or anything. We're still kind of like piecing it together from a variety of different, classes and our own analysis and everything. So take everything with a grain of salt.
Yeah, maybe consider reading the stuff we're citing yourselves.
Yes. Don't take our word for what we say. We know.
Yeah. Okay, let's go. Our first is our first character study, and I think you're up first.
Yes, I am. Okay, so I did Rachel this time, which seems perhaps counterintuitive because we don't see Rachel that, often. We don't have like an interlude specifically for her, right? Where we just kind of, which I feel like makes it all the more interesting because there's huge amounts of character development for Rachel, particularly in this arc, right? And it's so interesting because it all kind of happens in the background where she's just sort of like developing emotionally. I mean, we see her a lot, like she's active in the fight scenes and when there's like large gatherings of people and team meetings and that sort of thing. But really, we don't really check in with her until way late when Taylor pops in to see how she's doing.
Yeah,
we get like a little bit of a look throughout, but yeah, it was just really interesting to see like how it's not like humongously drastic, but it was just like a kind of an interesting kind of subplot that was happening along with the kind of more action based main plot.
Yeah, we have kind of a collection of just points along her growth. A couple during like the Echidna arc, and then during with that final goodbye, and a couple times during some other fights, and ending, of course, with the final scene with the Charlotte interlude where she comes in with all the puppies and stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of growth between all those points.
Yeah, it's sort of like leaps and bounds, strangely enough. But I think it's just kind of the shift, like the growth happens because she has a mentality shift from the beginning. Because like when we had her interlude and, we kind of saw how she perceived herself in like the before and how she thought about like herself in a social position and kind of her value, I think we really sort of got a very clear perspective of that. Then kind of this arc, we don't really see her thought process as to like why she kind of has like decided to open herself up, I would say, kind of open up her willingness to like trust and to listen, and not just listen, but learn. And then also, which I feel like is almost the most significant point, is to like kind of make or like cultivate friends by herself, of her own volition.
Yeah, she's kind of, I mean, Taylor kind of describes it as her own, like, family, but it is really interesting that it's, like, it's people that she has complete choice over whether they're there or not. Mm-hmm. And they also are the ones choosing to be around her. So.
Yeah, they, like, some of them seek her out specifically, and she, it's less about, like, being directly instructed to get along with specific people. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like Taylor's kind of like, you figure it out, you know, like, you have the agency to make your own decisions, you know, and kind of choose who to trust. And the fact that she, like, goes out and decides to, like, she's like, okay, then I will do that, you know? I don't know, it's just so, it's very heartwarming. She's a very heartwarming character to me.
On the finding her own sort of place, I always found it interesting that she was the one that got the underlings of Barker and Biter. Mm-hmm. I almost wonder if it was just thematic of Coil. It's just like, well, they're named Barker and Biter, they have to go with the dog cape, but probably not. But that they eventually slotted in, even though they were some of those that she didn't have a choice of whether they were there or not.
Yeah, true. There is kind of like a balance between, like, which I feel like speaks to it even more of, like, her choice to kind of say in her mind, okay, like, I'm in a position where I need to, like, accommodate at least a few people, you know, and kind of, like, make space in myself and around me to kind of, like, so that they can fit and I can fit, you know, where we kind of, like, become a puzzle that fits together, when before it was, like, all jagged edges.
Yeah.
Which is a very cliche metaphor, but, you know. Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of, like, peer through a few of the moments that I think were particularly interesting.
Yeah.
In terms of her, like, character development of each moment, I think. Okay, so first, I thought it was really interesting when we start out with, like, in the beginning of Arc 8, we have everybody kind of gathered together, and, you know, with Dinah, and Rachel is the one specifically to reach out to Dinah when Dinah gets quiet, where she's like, you're quiet, you know, like, what's going on? And it was just really interesting that she's not usually, like, that aware, I would say, of, like, the implication of a silence in, like, a social setting.
Yeah.
And then it was fascinating that she kind of, like, recognized that, which perhaps speaks to, like, her own silences, and that she kind of, like, was like, maybe there's something, you know, going on in that moment. But it was just interesting because she both recognized that it was happening, like, that there was a silence that had a specific meaning.
Yeah. And pretty often... Go ahead.
Oh, the second part is that she chose to, like, engage in conversation and figure out what was going on so that she could, like, address it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because very often I think we get a recurring beat of just, like, she doesn't want to talk unless if it's, like, necessary. Mm-hmm. I think even that first time that Taylor and her hang out with the dogs, they're basically, Taylor knows how, like, comfortable she is with the silence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah.
Her sort of, like, voluntary engagement with someone that she hasn't really had a lot of interaction with, I think spoke, like, a lot to her kind of, like, development of, like, social awareness.
Right.
Yeah, because then in, like, a little bit later on when Taylor is sort of, like, incapacitated and she, like, can't remove her mask and she, like, needs, you know, Rachel to, like, come and help her to, like, get out of the window, that sort of thing. Rachel recognizes, like, the physicality of, like, needing to, like, remove a bit of the mask so that she could, like, throw up and like, accommodate her needs. It kind of, like, was building upon this, like, anticipation of other people's needs. Which I don't know, she's just kind of, like, becoming better at, like, reading the situation. Mm-hmm. And kind of, I don't know, it's just, there's just, like, small little bits, you know, that you kind of, like, start piecing together.
I think identifying all those moments is really interesting. What I think is interesting in that is that as a reader, you know, and especially, well, when we go back and analyze, right, it's kind of hard to pull out all these tiny moments because they're tiny moments, and it's kind of hard to be like, oh, in this moment, you know, she changed completely to act a different way. Where really it's just one more point of evidence toward that change. But as you're reading through, you're just kind of taking that in, and your image of her is just slowly shifting over time.
Yeah, it's very much of, like looking in the mirror, but, like, constantly, like, every day you look in the mirror and you don't really notice the change until suddenly you like haven't looked in the mirror for a while, but it's like it's very different than someone who like remembers every detail, every moment, and sees and can trace each change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Rachel who came in with 3 dogs and punched Taylor
and just left.
And left.
Yeah, it's very different.
Yeah, it's not quite the same one that we have now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, she still does like place a lot of value like with her dogs and that sort of thing. Like the conversation that Taylor and Rachel have about the clones, where the first conversation they have, where Taylor's kind of like having trouble figuring out how to like convince herself that she needs to like kill them, where she has to like keep reminding herself, she's like, oh, they're not people. And then Rachel's like, what are you talking about? Like, that's already in my head. But then later on, when she encounters cloned dogs, she's like, oh, I see what you're saying.
Feels wrong. Yeah.
You know, she's able to like equate that. So she still has like her specific values, but she's able to like see into the heads of others, I suppose. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the technical psychological term for that is, but it's like a specific stage of development, I feel like, that I won't be able to remember, but
I wouldn't either. Yeah, that reminds me of just well, maybe this is jumping off to a different point a little bit too far ahead, but it reminds me of during Charlotte's interlude, I think, it's the part where Rachel is talking about, or Charlotte basically says something along the lines of losing a human is totally different than losing a dog, and how it's like not as... You can get over losing a dog, but it's really hard to get over losing a human, and it's like totally wrong. Like, I mean, talking to Rachel, of all people, saying that is completely wrong, but she doesn't, like, she kind of just accepts that that's just a difference in how they view it.
She doesn't immediately jump to violence.
Yeah,
which I feel like she would have absolutely had it been even like a few arcs earlier.
Does she even argue against it?
I feel like she just has like a disagreeable face,
expression.
And she kind of like tenses up, but then she kind of backs off immediately.
Yeah, that's
she doesn't
huge.
engage verbally or anything. Yeah, just the amount of control she has over herself, because like her first answer was like physical violence every time, and then now she's kind of like tempered that, kind of figured out when it's okay to use, when it's not okay to use, sort of thing. Which, I mean, I know I keep going back to this concept of like being able to read social situations, but like that's a really tough skill.
That is her main struggle. She has that dog psychology, and so she has to basically manually assess every situation and like logic her way through it. Yeah,
and she's got to kind of like build those rhythms of logic that like she wouldn't have, like, because she's even got to like sort of think about other people's logic too. Because, like, her logic doesn't work the same way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's really, like, sort of building a lot of, like, scaffolding onto her, like, understanding of the world. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, okay.
And I think, like, so we know basically that some natural triggers will change the minds of their... of the parahuman, right? Yeah. So she's like the first big example we see, and I think just the extent of it is comparable to Accord's the influence on his mind, where it's like he also has this completely uncontrollable intrusive thoughts that he has to logic his way into not acting on them. I think he succumbs to them a little bit more than she does, but it's the same sort of like intense alteration,
like immediate visceral reactions,
that now they have to work around, rather like there's no just getting over it. It doesn't just go away. They're kind of like stuck in a specific type of reasoning.
But and then we jump ahead a little bit to the Parahumans Online interlude, where we have the like wag the dog, where like they're very excited about going to go work for Rachel, and they're like super excited, and they return to make sure that everyone knows that it's definitely good. And they're, you know, it's just, I feel like it speaks to like, we don't see a lot of like, of the like intra-textual pieces kind of like pointing out like the good of the local teenage warlords, you know? I feel like because a lot of them are like pamphlets and that sort of thing of like what to watch out for, or like how to kind of, you know, navigate this new system, or like watch out, you know, with her specifically, they're like, oh, there's all this, like you have dogs to watch out for, and you know, this violence, but then there's like, it's interesting too that these people are, one, seeking her out very specifically, and then two, returning to like to the medium of like the internet to make sure and to like reassure and kind of like create a whole new facet of like her public identity.
Yeah.
You know, because like perhaps even unthinkingly that this individual has contributed to that.
Yeah, to that perspective of maybe she's actually cool. Like, yes, her dogs maul people and break their bones.
Yeah.
But she's also just cool and likes dogs, and that's significant in its own way.
Yeah, yeah.
That's relatable. I like dogs,
you know.
Right?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, it reminds me of that, in Arc 20, in Arcadia High, there's the flyer of, how does it, I don't remember how it's phrased. It's something like, know your surroundings or something like that.
Yes.
And it written with a picture of a dog is, you don't know shit. And so that implies, I don't know if it was Wag the dog, but it's clearly like someone who respects Rachel or identifies with Rachel's branch of the Undersiders.
Yeah, which is a whole nother concept of textual interaction of like graffiti and vandalism versus like the quote unquote like official documents being placed out, and this sort of like interaction of like public space as like a medium to like, anyways. Sorry, that's an aside. But
I almost went into that with the one my little essay thing, because it's about the rhetoric of places, so maybe we'll touch on it there.
Oh, good. I miss rhetoric. But anyways, and then kind of like in the jumping a little bit further ahead past the whole high school stuff, at the moment when Taylor comes to visit, kind of, and to like assess Rachel's like new surroundings and everything, it's not stereotypical, but it's very like a very common way to kind of like forge relationships of like food, you know, the consumption of food. Sorry, that was a really strange way to make that.
It was a little bit. I'm aware of the act of the consumption of food as a bonding experience among humans, yes.
Okay. So anyway, so this thing, you know, the food consumption altogether sitting, you know. Yeah, well, it was just, I don't know, it was nice that like that was, you know, that was kind of like the moment that we get to see with everyone is them playing with the dogs, and then all of them kind of eating together, eating the like long green vegetables, all of this, and the kid looking like super excited about it. 'Cause she like the kind of the way that Rachel kind of articulates what she wants, it seems kind of that she's still sort of figuring out how to like coexist all together, but like that she's like really trying very, very hard to make sure that the space is like welcoming and is a place of like community.
Yeah, she's really like just calm about it. Where I think she's trying to casually figure out how to best train these people. Yeah. And she's realizing that little bits of praise of, you know, saying that the food was good and things like that is kind of basically giving a treat, and so she's kind of working on that as well, which is fun.
Yeah.
And learning to trust people enough to start giving them dogs, and that's really huge for her as well.
Yes, that whole sequence where Rachel's kind of like explaining how she's like very specifically like picking out the dogs, like making sure that the dogs are able to like exist with families and interact with them. It's really like important, I think, to note that one, that she's put like huge amount of thought and like effort into this, because like Taylor kind of suggested that like earlier on, where she's kind of like, you need to like think about like the importance, I think, of like working with others and kind of like trying to like make these pathways so that she can like facilitate her dogs and everything. And I don't know, it's just really interesting because we don't see Rachel have that thought process of like, okay, so Taylor said this and I need to like think through this, and here's these like specific ways that I can implement this and all of this. We don't really see her kind of like think through that. We see the aftermath of it.
Yeah. I think the first moment that we see something along, well, it's probably not the first moment, but a moment that we see along these lines is back in arc, I want to say 15, but where they all meet up at the Undersider base, and one of Rachel's vets basically talks about having a greyhound or getting one, and even Rachel's like really hostile during that conversation, but at the end of it, she does relent and basically say, you can have this particular greyhound.
Yeah.
And it's one of those like moments very much in the middle of that transformation where she's still really hostile. She's still really kind of untrusting of people, but she's really willing to take a chance on someone if they really seem like they know what they're talking about.
Yeah. It's like all these like small pieces of like choosing to trust. I feel like that sort of like accumulate, you know, but yeah. And then I feel like the very end also that this, in the moment as Taylor's leaving, where Rachel says thanks, she's like curled up on the couch with like the kid and everything, and she can't even, Rachel like isn't visible or anything, but like there is this I guess like acknowledgement of the catalyst, I would say, that Taylor kind of like started.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's Taylor that kind of started Rachel down this path of, you know, but then Rachel was the one who kind of like decided to like actively listen and like, you know, kind of gain and develop like a modicum of control like over her emotional responses and like her ability to like kind of cultivate companionship and everything. Yeah.
I think her big turning points were originally when Taylor was reaching out. That was the very beginning. But then eventually when Rachel betrayed her by throwing her into the containment foam was another one when Taylor basically said, even though you betrayed me, I'm going to be your friend, damn it. And we see during her interlude when she meets the Siberian how much it's been like eating away at her.
Yeah, it's really been like sitting with her.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that like the Siberian gives her an alternate option of be wild and give up basically and just become go along that easy path and become the end result of that. And during the Slaughterhouse-9 arcs, she realizes that that's not what she wants, and she goes the other direction, and she, I think, conquers that urge to be wild and instead works really hard on becoming a social person.
Yeah.
So in a way, the Siberian is partly responsible for her being this casual person as well, I think.
Yeah. Seeing the sort of like path she doesn't want to go down. Yeah. The 9 had like a huge impact on a lot of the Undersiders. You know?
to say the least, yeah. I think the one that had the least impact from it probably was like Tattletale. Maybe Imp or Regent, but Gru is a bit obvious. Taylor is also a bit obvious. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what exactly to point at.
I feel like Regent.
Yeah, with Cherish.
With Cherish, he had like his whole like familial chat. Yeah, I don't know
about
kind
of
Imp.
Like defining himself against her. At the very least, Imp is now more okay with murder, so that's a change. But then again, maybe she was always okay with murder. We don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. She's pretty casual about. She's pretty like cavalier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Imp. But okay, so the last moments about Rachel are all from. Oh wait, no, they're multiples of them. Okay, so first it's from a little bit of Perian's interlude, when they're all kind of in their team meeting, where you know the initial moments sort of when Taylor turned herself in, and when Rachel shows up at the meeting, she doesn't know, right? And then Regent sort of just kind of casually tosses it out, and then she immediately is like, she has a plan, and it takes him like a while to like convince her that maybe she doesn't have a plan, because she's like very convinced, similarly to in the fight against Dragon's Suits, where she was just kind of like, okay, yeah, like she has a plan, like we just have to trust her because she always has a plan.
She always figures out the one way out. Yeah.
But in the moment where they kind of she sort of realizes that maybe she doesn't, or they don't know how it's going to happen, or like she kind of like realizes that maybe there isn't like an immediate return sort of thing. Yeah. She doesn't like immediately like fly off the handle and like react in a very like violent and like visceral sort of way. Like she has that like anger and like betrayal and like panic, but she doesn't like it doesn't like
she doesn't punch anyone. Yeah. Or storm off even, I don't think.
I mean, Perian's like super freaked out because it's Perian, but like just the amount of restraint that she shows in that moment is just, it was just like, I feel like it said a lot about how much control she has over herself now, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then even too, she like, even after she's like not super sure about the intentions of Taylor with this whole turning herself in, she's still kind of like, I mean, it doesn't matter. Like we still need to like support her.
Yeah.
You know, we still need to avenge her if they like fuck her over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something all the Undersiders are in agreement about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really fascinating. This sort of like parallel, but like completely, totally different of like her first betrayal and her second, you know, because it's, I don't know, it's just the circumstances are so totally different when it's like, oh, somebody that you've kind of like adopted into your group versus like your leader that like has a penchant of setting up things, you know? Yeah. But in in the last little second, you know, that I wanted to look at for Rachel is Charlotte's interlude, which is the scene with like the puppies and everything where she's like, you know, she still kind of like has, you know, she's still Rachel, where she kind of, they have to like send somebody else to make sure that she's nice to the children and everything, but just she's very like, you know, determined to like make sure that she's like doing the things that she wants to do, I guess. Yeah. You know, and like offering comfort when she can in her own kind of roundabout, gruff sort of way.
That's such an adorable scene. Just gruffly handing puppies shoving puppies into people's hands to be like, hey, so you need this.
Yeah. And then I think it's also, I mean, perhaps I'm interpreting the moment where they're talking about her going into the portal of the world. What is the official term for it?
I think it's just the portal at this point.
Okay. Yeah. In that moment where she's entertaining the idea of like her and her dogs going, there's a moment where she, like, it says, then she seems to think of something, and then she says, maybe, which I don't know if we're supposed to interpret that as like, maybe she's not going to go, or maybe she's going to take her friends / minions / found family with her. Because I feel like either option is maybe a possibility.
When I first read it, so I think that's when Taylor's first giving her the idea, right? And the way that I interpreted it was, it's a reluctant maybe because she doesn't want to leave like Taylor and the rest of the Undersiders, but mostly Taylor. Yeah. And so I think that's actually a point where the way that I see it is that Rachel's growth has kind of outstripped Taylor's view of her even. Where Taylor thinks that Rachel still just wants to be alone. Yeah. Which with just her dogs, even though she's just now seeing that found family. That I think Rachel was more hesitant to do that. But at the end of it, I think during Charlotte's interlude, that's when she basically like announces to the group that like, I'm probably going to be going over.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think you're right that maybe is probably connected to all these people around her that she actually likes.
Yeah. There's just so much vulnerability that she's like willingly displaying to other individuals around this time that, I don't know, it's kind of cool to like see it kind of happen gradually. Also, it's on wonderful. The note of like Taylor's perspective of her, like kind of her categorization, I feel like she has that tendency, Taylor does, to kind of like assess somebody and then kind of keep them in that particular assessment.
That's an interesting observation.
And then not always really revise it. Which, like, because she really likes things to be like, she likes to know things, you know, and have them be known. And I feel like the social and emotional development of people, or the changing emotional landscape of somebody after a trauma, I feel like she doesn't quite know how to navigate.
Yeah, I think Armsmaster / Defiant is another good example of her just struggling to understand that he's becoming a better person. Yeah. Like there's multiple times where she meets him and still like kind of is thinking of him as an asshole, but he's kind of like a good person, but still, you know, he was a dick to me before. Yeah. She's kind of I think that might be interesting to parallel the two of them actually, Rachel and Armsmaster. Another parallel that I'm seeing is they both encountered members of the Slaughterhouse 9, and in the wake of it, kind of went in the other direction that the 9 wanted them to go. Yeah. Same thing with Mannequin.
Yeah, they sort of like glimpsed into the abyss. And when the abyss glimpsed back, they were like, no, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. The concept of her going away, of Rachel going away into this space that's like very empty, but like full of potential. Just, I don't know. It seems, I mean, she was sort of like alone for like a while with her dogs, you know, but then now it's like a different sort of solitude to be on a planet all by yourself. If indeed she is, who knows? Maybe there's like various life forms. Who knows? Indeed,
who knows?
Yeah, but...
Do you have anything else about Rachel?
That was kind of it. Just,
okay. Yeah. There's I mean, I think she's very commonly a favorite character. Like,
I mean, I could definitely wax
people's top
about
5.
her for like a while.
Yes. She's just lovely. There's so many wonderful moments. Yeah. Especially, this is actually, you mentioned the betrayals earlier. I think this is actually like her 3rd betrayal of Taylor doing that. The second one being when Rachel like thought that Taylor had turned coat during the coil stuff.
Yeah.
And in that one, she did feel super betrayed and she acted on it, but she kind of also got over it too, like relatively quickly.
Yeah, once there was an explanation, she like was pretty like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Which is interesting. That's that halfway point again. And in this one, she just doesn't believe it's a betrayal.
Yeah.
Okay, then let's move on to my character analysis. I did Clockblocker.
I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, okay, so Clockblocker. Honestly, at first I was finding it a little bit difficult to find another character that was like as developed as Rachel. So I just picked one that is like, I just find just really fun to have around.
Yeah.
And I don't, see a lot of super in-depth analysis on him in particular because he's more of a minor character.
Yeah.
Even though I feel like we know him really well, even though we've only had one interlude and one therapy session, which are basically our main looks into his perspective.
Yeah, but I feel like they were pretty deep looks into his psyche.
That's fair. Yeah.
And his like banter, I feel like, is the kind of banter that like you hear and you're like, oh, he feels familiar,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can kind of draw out his personality, especially from the beginning, right? You're like, okay, he named himself Clockblocker, and he's not just like a doofus.
Yeah,
he's like fairly intelligent, and then you can draw out the rest of it. So on that, actually, his big thing is that he actually does go through a pretty big character arc through like 3 different states, essentially. He has this beginning where he is that jokester, playful, and things like that. That middle with his interlude where everything's gone wrong and he's extremely jaded. He's extremely frustrated with how the villains are winning, and although that's expounded upon later on with the Yamada interlude, but he feels like he's always in the wrong place at the wrong time, and we'll come back to that particular phrase in a minute because it's a little obvious. But and then by the end of this, by the time that Taylor turns herself in, he's basically gone the other direction where he's not only he's serious, but he's not just like mad about things.
Yeah.
He wants to take things seriously and like fix them. And I think a really key moment of just showing the change that he's gone through is when Taylor turns herself in and she says basically like, what position do you need me to take? And he goes, once upon a time, I would have had a response to that. Which Taylor doesn't get, which is hilarious, but because it's like, come on, assume the position, come on.
Yeah.
But he doesn't choose to take that joke, which is usually a defense mechanism for him of like making things unserious anymore. And he's taking this seriously still. So I was wondering, right, what his power is to stop time with an indeterminate time to it, which is interesting. And I was wondering like what possibly could be his trauma for this, like why
begin that.
Yeah, exactly. And so basically I was trying to identify the irony in it. And the main one I find is that he has like full control over one thing when he's next to it, right?
Yeah.
He has the control to make it completely stop, which is as full of control you can get before your regent. But he cannot decide for how long. Ugh. And so it's this complete certainty this thing will not move, mixed with a extreme uncertainty. He has no idea how long it's going to last. And so I was just thinking of like, he can't really even work on his own because if like there's more than two guys, right? If he freezes them like a distance apart where it takes like 5 seconds to run from one to the other, he can only be like next to one. And then if they have powers, there's always a chance that they unfreeze and then immediately like get away, right? And he has no idea when they're going to stop. And so that main frustration he expresses during his interlude is that he's in the wrong place at the wrong time. Let me read out a section from him. So the whole time he was frustrated with how when he's with his father, who is sick, and he's trying to basically buy time for them, he doesn't feel like he's doing enough, and that on the street there's horrible things happening, and when he's on the street he feels like he's not able to stop enough things. At the very end of it, when he's like in a fight, which is exactly where you know his power wants him to be, his interlude ends with, he realized what it was, this calm. Whatever else it was, this fight was a refuge from that feeling that had plagued him since the fight with Leviathan ended. The feeling that he was always in the wrong place, doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, in the face of a city in crisis and a dying father. This, right here, was where he was needed. This is what I'm here for. And I mean, I think the irony there is, or it's clear that the thematic line is very clear in wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah.
And yeah, his power is to stop time, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's when in those moments of combat that basically he's satisfied that like this is the correct time. I mean, I think it's mostly just because like that's what the trauma wants him to do, and even though it might not actually be the best place for it.
Do you feel like I mean, we've seen multiple different parahumans like impacted with their like mental health based on their like passenger. Do you feel like Clockblocker is one of those people where he like that feeling of wrongness and rightness and being this sort of like violent space of fighting? Do you think that is directly impacted like brain chemistry wise, like from the passenger?
A really good question, and I am not sure. I would say that almost certainly on some level, at the very least, just because like Pavlovian conditioning of just he usually feels right in a battle, so of course he's going to seek it out a little bit more, and it's going to self-reinforce. And it's interesting, even in that fight, he felt calm when he's fighting against Trickster, which is like the epitome of wrong place, wrong time, right?
Yeah.
On a different line, so going back to that maturity thing, so he starts off very childish, right? And I think just this example of his childishness is that the main way that he uses his power, especially before he encounters Taylor, is freeze tag.
Yeah,
that's his power. It's to tag your it or tag and you're frozen. And I mean that's a child's game, and it's not until the Echidna fight and basically when he starts steadying himself right in the wake of that he starts branching out. I mean, he always had like the cards and things like that and papers that he would stick in the air, but this is the first like really big difference where he has that gauntlet that shoots out the fingers and cables. And yeah, I think that's just a really important moment of him taking things a lot more seriously, and the fact that it's a ranged sort of attack I think is also significant, that it kind of bridges that wrong place sort of thing.
It's kind of this prescribed right place.
So that's the main stuff I had for Clockblocker. Obviously there's a lot more story left to go, but I wanted to go to a character or a listener comment who asked, I'd be curious to hear a discussion on how Dennis / Clockblocker is presented as a foil for Taylor. Grumpy Toast is asking this. Very few people, especially heroes, ever shake Taylor's conviction, but he does. His conversation with Yamada highlights how disillusioned he is, and that's before the triumphant reveal. I feel like we were supposed to respond to this during the overview episode. I don't know if we did.
I don't remember if we did or not.
But regardless, we can respond to it now, or again, if we already did. So, as an opposite for her, it's interesting because they both, hate authority. And his position in this sort of like questioning and disillusionment of authority is one that he has been in the position, like he has seen it inside of authority, I guess you could say, like the inner workings
that only they would show to their like little like inner group. Which I feel like that's why he sets it up. He's set up as like a foil for Taylor, because Taylor has experienced the kind of the like outsider perspective on how much the like heroes and the like lawful pathways of like dealing with conflict don't necessarily accommodate everybody, or they have like a particular biases and slants and everything. So I feel like his perspective, while they both have like that disillusionment, I feel like his like positionality from like the inside gives him a specific amount of situated ethos. I feel like is that the correct type of ethos that I'm thinking of, where it's like he's entering the situation with a prescribed amount of like authority and expertise. Yeah,
I think so. Go ahead.
Oh, so like when he enters, like when he engages her in conversation, especially in the little back of the van where he like can't not talk to her, he's like, I have to ask you these questions, and then she's kind of like, oh my god, like that is a lot of things that I've done, you know. I think his the coupling of like him being part of the wards but then not fully believing in the like imputability, I think, of their kind of their actions and their intentions. I think those two things like combined have like allow for Taylor to be shooketh, you know.
That is a great way to phrase things.
Sorry, I don't remember what is the actual
shaken.
Oh, thank God.
Okay.
It's been a strange week. Yeah,
it has.
Yeah. But do you know what I mean? Did that make any sense, my rambling?
I think so. So you're basically saying that his internal perspective is able to, because he's actually like in it. I mean, Taylor never actually really gave the PRT a chance, right?
Yeah.
So she doesn't actually know what it's like to be a hero, and he can see the frustrations. I mean, they share the same frustrations with the authorities of how they're holding him back and things like that, or holding them all back from doing what they feel that they really need to be doing.
Yeah.
But also sees how just being on your own and not actually having an outside perspective at all, or anyone's outside perspective on you, leads you to do some pretty bad things.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I was gonna say. Is that I feel like too, like a lot of her encounters with like the PRT and with the boards like have been people who were like who have held a certain amount of like moral haughtiness when speaking to her, like when asking her questions about her like actions, and I feel like Clockblocker does not necessarily present that front to her.
Yeah, he seems to acknowledge that like being a hero, just having the title is not really enough. Because he's more focused on like what is the actual results, like am I actually making the world a better, safer place when I'm out there? I feel like I'm not as part of the hero organization.
Yeah.
Whereas like Armsmaster at the very beginning and some of the others, just being a hero, calling yourself a hero, or like in Taylor's argument against Flechette is like, that's all you need. That you just need to be on the good side. But that's not enough. Although, I mean, more of the heroes than the villains certainly are better people, but... True.
But yeah, there's that sort of like label equals specific type of value in Clockblocker's approach, I think.
Yeah.
Which that's what Taylor walks around with too, right? Where she's kind of like, just because I'm deemed a villain, just because I'm called a villain, or call myself a villain, does not necessarily mean I hold these particular values, or that I find these particular actions, or that I condone, you know, Slaughterhouse-9 levels of violence or anything like that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a tangential thing, it just occurred to me that Taylor... Do you remember when we were talking about Coil and just talking about how, like, megalomaniacal... So Coil, we were commenting on how his desires to take over the city was very megalomaniacal, and, like, the belief that he's the only one that can do this, right? And Taylor has just... I mean, right now she's kind of dropped that, but
yeah,
over the course of this part of the story, she became that exactly.
Yeah, she was definitely super good.
She really Yeah, she believes that she's the only one that can hold the city together and how it needs to be held. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I feel like as much as she like railed against Coyle's actions, she really didn't like super address any of them besides Dinah, you know?
Yeah.
Which I feel like, I mean, she had like an alternative plan that involved Tattletale and everyone, but I feel like her fixating on Dinah kind of like took her attention away from some of the other parallels of her and Coyle. Yeah.
I think I had some other small thing with Clockblocker, but I think it's kind of something that I should have just mentioned earlier, so it's fine.
You did. I really like, though, I mean, I know it's very small, but I really like your concept of like how he's sort of like stuck in this like temporary action of everything. Everything that he does is just like this temporary, he places this like liminal moment upon individual people and it just like wears off.
Yeah.
So he's like, everything that he does is like ephemeral.
Yeah. That's the thing, is that like if he freezes someone, like if he was facing off against like two villains or whatever, he freezes them both. He can't actually like lock down the win at all by himself.
Yeah.
He needs someone else to come in with cuffs and things like that. Well, I guess he could use his own cuffs, but the point is that his power is not alone to keep someone defeated at all.
Yeah. He's really sort of like a interlude or like a prelude. He's very much a prelude type of power, which begs the question of, does he have things that he has not fully developed yet? You know, like, does he have other powers that he hasn't fully explored?
That's a great question to ask.
I know I will not get any answers, alas.
I'm doing my best to do poker face every time. So that's all I have for Clockblocker. Obviously, there's a little bit less material for him than Rachel has during this. Yeah. But I did find it really cool how there was a full entire arc just by this part of the story with a character that we get one interlude and then we kind of don't really see very often at all because, you know, he's one of the heroes.
Yeah.
So
I really like that there are so many dynamic characters in Worm. You know, like, I feel like even the static characters they still hold an element of, you know, like dynamicism.
Dynamicity, maybe?
Movement.
I don't know.
They still, and development. How about, there you go.
Excellent.
Yeah, because even if it's just like you view them as a flat character and then suddenly you have like background information, be it like a paragraph or an interlude, and then you're like, oh my god, I have a completely new perspective on this person. Yeah.
Sometimes there's retroactive development where we see where they are now, but then we see how their past was and how it was even worse of a past. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I have on him. Let's move on to our next section.
Yes.
Before we get to the essays, let's go through our favorite moments that we haven't already talked about, just for a little bit.
Hurrah.
So, hit me with a favorite moment from the last four arcs? 6? I can't count. From the last section.
5? That's 5, I think.
Ish. Yeah,
maybe
sure.
6.
I believe you.
Okay. I feel like I brought this up, but I felt the need to look it up and read it out because I love this piece and there was not enough time spent if we discussed it last time. So I'm just going to read it because it just requires reading. Regent nudged me. With Crew gone, it's your job to lay down the law. No human sacrifices. He'd mimic Gru's tone of voice with a forced lowness. No human sacrifices. Did I really want to veto any possibilities when we were faced with threats like the Endbringers and Echidna? Phenomenal. I love that.
I think, and then he goes on, he's like, you're not saying anything.
He's like, what are you doing? Like, come on. This is where you're supposed to refute.
Come on. Yeah. You're at least supposed to refuse on principle.
Yeah.
Come on.
He was just like a lot of fun.
Yes. And I had also a moment which I think like consistently makes me chuckle. When he first gets captured by Echidna, he's just barely holding on and pushing himself out. And he says, hey, and Echidna turns to him. And we first see this through Taylor's perspective before we get into Echidna's interlude and we actually hear what he says. So we kind of already are like primed for like something happened over there.
Yeah.
So Echidna, currently in a complete rage, turns to him and asks, what? And then he says, when you made my clone, can you give him a goatee? It's so good. And then she just pulls a bit. It's like, he didn't have to do that at all. But I
don't know.
He just felt that he had to.
He's such a great like character throughout this whole. Like, there's another point before when it's like raining and they're about to go and like confront the teeth and, you know, butchering everybody, all of the butchers.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like commentating in the background where he's like, it's been 20 minutes. We're still out here. And she's looking all creepy and I look terrible in a wet t-shirt. Then they have this whole like annoyed interaction and then he resumes his commentary. He's like, 23 minutes.
In the rain.
It's great.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think him and Imp both just continually over time just grow into better and better comedic relief characters. I mean, now obviously they're so much more deeper than that, but just their humor beats just hit harder and harder.
Yeah,
it's wonderful. Do you have another moment?
Yes. Okay, so the other moment, which I don't know why, like, this has become like a theme where I'm like strangely interested in all of the like biology of everything. But there's an interesting, it doesn't really last very long because like the sickness like wears off, but like when Taylor like emerges out of Echidna, her like microbiome is like, it had been like replicated and then like made toxic by being like within Echidna, I think. Is that, am I remembering that correctly?
That is definitely Taylor's theory, yeah.
Okay, because like she was sick for a moment, but then it kind of like wore off.
Yeah, just like how there was evil bugs and stuff, there was evil bacteria. Yeah.
Which is like amazing, you know, because we have the whole like our digestive tract, all of the like bacteria living within us, right? That we're kind of this like being made up of a whole lot of beings. And it was so interesting that there's this like evil gut bacteria.
Yeah.
Along.
When she first gets her powers, she comments on how she feels like tingling or fizzing all over her body. And some people have theorized that that's the feeling of all the bacteria just continuously, the bacteria on the surface of her skin continuously like entering her body.
Oh my God. That's so interesting. Yeah, because you don't really think about the really small, you know, like unicellular beings that are all kind of like around us.
Yeah. Or even the slightly bigger ones, all the mites and whatnot.
Mites. Horrendous. I mean, I like bugs as a concept. Yes. I do not like bugs in reality. But mites, horrendous.
They're on you right now. They're on your eyelashes.
Oh my God. Don't tell me these things. Don't tell me these things. How am I to sleep? I already have like...
yeah, just close your eyes. It's fine. And then they get to meet each other. Cross lashes.
I don't know. They're just... The bugs here are weird.
Here?
Yeah.
What do you mean here?
Down here in College Station.
Oh, okay.
So
I thought you were talking about like here as in like your eyeballs.
Oh, well, that's true. They are. Like I have gnats that live in my place, but they only appear late at night and they are horrifically attracted to my eyeballs. Like gnats. What are gnats doing around my eyes?
I am very concerned.
And then I like lost a mosquito in a mirror.
What do you mean you lost it?
Like I was going to kill it against the mirror, but then it disappeared, but then I couldn't find it again. And it was in an enclosed space full of light, so where did it go?
To the mirror dimension.
And there's like weird... anyways, we don't need to get down into the strange holes that I have found in this place.
Okay. Another moment I really liked is just the long list of charges that are levied against Taylor. I know we mentioned it last time, but it's this really funny moment where he's just like 50 counts of aggravated assault, 13 counts of aggravated assault with a parahuman ability, and it's just so much.
There's just horrendous
like
amounts.
Hundreds. So for our little interlude bit in the middle, I had half an idea to look up like times where someone had like double-digit aggravated assault charges and just trying to see how many years Taylor would get in prison if it was based off of that. But I couldn't really find one
because they don't
that
exist,
was
or
significant enough.
Like
I'm sure there are,
secretive.
But I couldn't find. Yeah, it was probably just like nothing turned up when I searched like 10, 12, 30, 50 counts of aggravated assault, and there was no results. So, which is really too bad.
I suppose
but yeah, it's
maybe
a
that's
wonderful
good.
moment. Oh well, yeah, but for research purposes.
True.
And then so of course there's the puppy moments with Rachel. That's wonderful. And again, I already mentioned it last time, but Blasto's interlude. I love Blasto so much, and I love that whole thing. Also, there's an intense irony, or I keep using the word irony, and I think I'm forgetting how to use it correctly sometimes.
But that's a tricky one to know.
Where when he first gets that lab, I think we empathize with like oh my gosh, this is awesome. He's got a fully tricked out lab. He can do anything. He starts making an Endbringer, and you're like, this is so cool. Yeah, like you have the like, I want to see this character get overpowered feeling.
Yeah.
And then Bonesaw comes in and just destroys him. It's like, oh man, he was just getting started.
There was so much potential.
Yeah. Any other moments that you have in mind?
I don't know why mine all sort of like ended up with like Noelle bits, but there was it was more of like a description, like in the fight, because both tongue and tail are described to be like prehensile, which to me is like a very like scientific perspective, but it's like the like individual movement, yes, where it's like able to like grab things. Isn't that what that means? In my head, that's what it means.
Yeah,
human
it's
anthropoclast.
a limb capable of grasping.
Yeah, which is like, I mean, it's like this, it's a perfectly reasonable explanation, but it's just imagining like a tongue and a tail that like seemingly probably very large.
Yeah.
Being able to like grasp things capable, that's just horrendous. I mean, I'm very aware that there's like animals that are like out and about who have tongues and tails that are capable of grasping things. But it just seemed like a lot from a being so large.
It's basically her tongue is basically like a grasping tentacle. I pictured it like at least as thick as around as your arm.
Yeah.
Like at least.
That's
probably more.
Long. Terrifying.
Yeah.
Oof.
The last thing I want to mention is just that the audiobook interludes for this section are so good. I already mentioned that, but there's so many fantastic interludes. So 2 fully like voice acted ones, which are Yamada's and the Parahuman Online one, and there's multiple other ones that just have some brilliant effects that like really pull it all together. It's just wonderful. I went out of my way to listen to the audiobook chapters.
Yeah.
Of the interludes. Okay, that is what we have for our favorite moments, unless if you have anything else.
I think that's it.
Cool. All right, let's get into your essay.
Haha.
What are we talking about,
Okay,
Clarence?
so we're going to go on a bit of a journey because I have a variety of different people that I want to pull from. But an overview is that we will be discussing the soul and maybe identity in like materiality, right? So it's kind of the permanence of identity, which I suppose is an illusion, but like, you know, under the guise of like the transitive properties of like costumes and clothes and physical bodies.
Yeah. As a quick aside, I love so many of our discussions, not necessarily on this podcast, but so many of our discussions, we like start talking about a thing and then we have to like acknowledge or like putting aside that there's actually no free will or whatever.
Yeah.
And then we just move on.
Yeah. It's just, you know, little side notes, you know, funny little post-its that we leave.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So before we begin, I'm going to kind of like make a map, so that, you know, we don't get lost in the interim. So I kind of want to go around. I want to talk about, I want to talk through a few different writers and like theorists who discuss like clothing and dress, and embodiment, you know, kind of how those fit together. And I must preface this, which I suppose all of that was prefaced also, but like this is a specific thing that has influenced a great deal of everything, is that I've been reading Shakespearean comedies, which are full of transformation, right? So I had to pull in Castiglione, who is he wrote the Book of the Courtier during the Renaissance, so that's like early 1500s, late 1400s in my head. I don't have a specific date because I am a fool, but
I think it's perfectly all right to not know the publication date of Castiglione's, what was it called?
Book of the Courtier.
Yeah. I'm aware of the concept, but I don't remember the...
Yeah, I just know that
basically
he's
the
like
one...
there, you know, he's like around during the Renaissance.
Okay.
But
go on, yes.
Yeah, so then we'll look at a couple of French sociologists. And I was just going to look at Bourdieu, but then I went down this whole path of Bourdieu, and then there was like this whole overlap with Franco Berardi, who isn't French, I should definitely point out. And Spinoza, who I also think is not French, and then Foucault, who is. And then we'll look a little bit at Judith Butler and like gender theory and kind of her like first postulations about gender, and kind of like how clothes and identity and materiality sort of like all fit together, and really, I mean, with Bourdieu and Butler, we can't really discuss any of that outside of the context of like class and gender. Because all of the things that we are kind of like, that we use, all these like material objects we use to kind of make ourselves known to others without like explicitly articulating, verbally or whatever, that we use them to like kind of fit us into these specific groups of class and gender and, other social classifications.
Right.
Yeah. But okay, so onward and upward, sorry. Then we'll after we kind of, look through all of that, then we'll look at the various manifestations in Worm, where we'll look at costumes, and then we'll look at civilian clothing, and then this sort of like manufactured or like shared bodies, which seems, but it like, I don't know, it's the whole materiality thing all mixed up together.
Okay,
yeah,
let's go.
So here we go. First, Castiglione, so I said before he wrote the Book of the Courtier, but like, the significance of that is that it was this instruction manual. It didn't read like a how-to book. It was like a, story sort of thing where like, it's like with the prince, where like, it's not like a explicit etiquette book, but like it is.
But it's a guide.
Yeah. It like tells you how to act and, how to be in this like new public space where you kind of like, they were kind of making sense of this distinction between public and private lives and that sort of thing. And kind of like how to like put upon one's like public self, right? With like dress, and countenance and, affectation. They use that a lot. But so because that was like so prevalent during the Renaissance, a lot of the comedies play around with that concept of using dress and like, adornment to identify, like oneself. Specifically, a lot of the times it's like with class and then sometimes with gender, because it's Shakespeare and he has a lot of fun with all of that, the bending of rules. So he kind of like creates these spaces of like transformation and everything. But the specific thing that I wanted to read out from Castiglione is from the second book, I think, because there's 4 books of the Courtier, or like 4 sections. They're very verbose, the Renaissance people. But so the specific thing was this one individual speaking, saying, I do say that dress is no bad index of the wearer's fancy, although it may be sometimes wrong, and only this, but always in manners, as well as acts and words, are an indication of the qualities of the man in whom they are seen. Right? So it's like the external dressing is not an absolute sort of,
right.
Representation of an individual, but by choosing to wear individual things, by choosing to one thing over another, one piece of clothing over another to indicate specific like social rank, they are sort of like taking on this. They're kind of using costume and dress in the same way that they would acts and words to sort of formulate their like self. Yeah.
What's the cliche? Clothes make the man, right?
Yeah. So they
kind
sort
of
like
literalized, yeah.
Play around with that concept of like, in the Taming of the Shrew, which is kind of a terrible play, but the beginning of it, they really sort of like play around with that concept, because there's this tinker, I think, or tailor, I don't remember, but he's like kind of drunk outside of like a tavern, and one of like a nobleman or something is like, pick him up, dress him up in my clothes, and like talk to him and act like, put him in my bed, like pretend that he is awakening from this dream, and tell him that he's a lord, right? So that he's wearing these clothes and being talked to like a lord. So, he will presumably, like, they're just playing a joke, but it's this sort of, this suggestion of like, there's all these like pieces that make you into what you are.
Right. And if you replace enough of them, you kind of just become that.
Yeah. But yeah, so the thing to pull from Castiglione is the concept of dress as something that can offer a sort of like encasing, where it kind of like, fits you. It provides you a structure that perhaps you can fill, but doesn't necessarily reflect how you actually are.
Right.
Which seems contradicting, but I mean,
yeah, it's never 100% correct, and it can never just be assumed that it is correct. I mean, there's always some element of randomness in what you wear usually, why you decided over one thing over another. But the general trend at the very least are signals that you're giving off, and those signals come from a place inside of you too.
Yeah. There's like this whole interaction of like individual self versus like social self, and like what the options like that you've been handed versus like what. Anyways, that's a whole nother conversation about free will again, I guess. Mm-hmm. But okay, so we're gonna continue on to Bourdieu, who is he's a 20th century French sociologist who writes about like class and like the material conditions that kind of like create and then maintain or like perpetuate class distinctions. He also writes about space, so that's why I like him. But I want to particularly look at his concept of habitus, which is this. It's like the like structuring of the material surroundings. So this kind of like extends beyond just like clothes. This is sort of like the entirety of your material conditions and like possessions that sort of like both reflect and then kind of underline your like class condition, where it's like the specific things that you like choose to like place around you have like kind of become like indicators of your individual life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But okay, so I want to read a couple of quotes from his book Distinction. But okay, so the first one that I want to is every interior expresses in its own language the present and even the past state of its occupants, bespeaking the elegant self-assurance of inherited wealth, the flashy arrogance of the nouveau riches, the discreet shabbiness of the poor, and the gilded shabbiness of poor relations striving to live beyond their means. So it's like a lot of this is more like spatially oriented, but like it applies to the like the garb of individuals as well, of like holding on to both present and past selves, I would say. Obviously this is much more like placed within like a material wealth sort of definition, but when looking at it in a identity kind of reading, I would say that there is this accumulation of both like present self and then like past selves, past selves, as this sort of like almost this like superposition of like what you're wearing and what you have to be wearing, and like they hold on all these like vestigial pieces of yourself, Yeah.
These are decisions you made in the past when you were a slightly different person, and they're affecting you now.
Yeah. Well, because they also, I feel like they impact your mentality of like how you perceive yourself now is like influenced by how you perceived yourself before, or like reflecting back on your past self. Like you are comparing yourself now to like who you were before, that sort of thing, where you're like constantly, holding yourself up to who you knew yourself as. You know what I mean?
I think so.
Sorry, I'm really sort of like wandering around.
But you kind of have this past, not necessarily ideal, but sort of the same sort of thing where that is who you are, and you in the present, even though that idea of you being a certain way is not necessarily how you actually are in any given moment. So when you stray from that, you're trying to sort of right the ship and go back to how you are, the person that you are supposed to be, the person that wears these clothes and lives in this house and uses these objects is this sort of person.
Yes. Yeah, and there's all these like you kind of create these like specific associations with particular objects, like based on your interaction with them, like your bodily experiences or like your social, observations, I would say, where like they have like acquired these particular kinds of associations, which hold on to that concept of like things kind of acquiring particular associations, because I feel like that's very important in the discussion with Worm and like costumes and kind of how to construct or make or purchase costumes. Yeah, there was another piece of this.
Well, related to that, so just as an example that is helping me understand. So like my phone is the case is very ugly and the screen protector is very cracked. And so every time that I look at my phone and I see these things, I'm reminded that I am a person that is okay with these things. And I have to justify that whenever there's some conflict or someone says, get a new screen protector or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, this is what I'm used to. I don't want to, and I come up with whatever reasons that I need to in a given moment to justify why I am the way that I am, even though like I don't necessarily have like any real big reason to hold on to these things.
Yeah.
It's just because that is the person that I am. Because of past actions, because I haven't changed that yet.
Yeah. You've kind of like yourself is like inscribed upon the actions or the inaction of your phone and the cracked case and screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. I think that's all I wanted to bring out of
Bordeaux.
Yeah, I may come back later if I feel it may be important. But, okay, so with Franco Berardi, he is an Italian Marxist. Actually, I don't know if he like particularly ascribes to Marxist thought specifically, or if he's just sort of like leftist.
Okay.
So I won't say either which way. But he's Italian, I'm fairly certain. And he writes this book, Soul at Work, where he's talking about like, you know, wealth and you know, the value of wealth being, you know, monetary versus like leisure time and all of this. And he has this whole like treatise on kind of how we can kind of reform the way that we orient ourselves in our system. But what I want to bring up is the very beginning of it. When it's not really him talking at all, he's just sort of like recounting some of the things that Spinoza and Foucault talk about. In terms of like bodies, because he is talking about the soul that, like, not the soul of like, you know, the spiritual soul, but like the one that, you know, is within the body, right? This like materialistic soul, the one that like animates.
So like your consciousness,
yeah,
that kind of soul,
yeah,
the decision making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I feel like you could also like use the term like just like life, you know, like whatever is you know, making our heart beat. I mean, not like in the very like literal sense of like breath, you know, but like this very like
the difference between just a
physically rooted
a dead human body, like a human body that is not acting at all, and a body with a life and personality and
life and
everything.
Personality. And I mean, obviously with him, he's thinking about like labor and everything, but his quote from Spinoza is like, what the body can do, like that is what its soul is, right? This action is what makes a soul of an individual. And Foucault's talking about like, he's talking about like the modernity, which I mean, if I reference, go back to what I was talking about with like discipline and punish, where like the way that we kind of control bodies and like how state implements punishment has, you know, like shifted. So like modernity it's all about like disciplining of the body, but like this sort of like kind of conditioning and you know, creating the situation of like creating like a routine for the body, you know. Here it is. Okay, so building the institutions and devices capable of subduing the body through the machines of social production, right? So they're talking about like work and labor and that sort of relation of like individual and labor and like large economic production. But I wanted to focus specifically on this concept that of the soul of like life in action, you know, as like what the body can do and what the body is, you know. And I feel like a piece of like the disciplining of the body is this sort of like adornment, kind of like what we place upon ourselves to sort of like signal who we are, you know what I mean?
I think so. So are you talking about essentially like as someone does something like work, right, their soul and that or identity shifts to basically become a person that does this work? Yeah, that like becomes a piece of their identity because of what they can do, which I feel like that seems to be particularly poignant when we're talking about individuals who make their identity so heavily around what they can do and what their bodies can do, or I suppose their minds too, because their passenger is like in their mind. Anyways, right?
Yeah, like is there like that materiality of their powers? Is that part of their body or part of their mind, or is there like no separation?
I think it's along the lines of no separation. Well, like it is an extra sense usually, so that is an added like aspect to the mind. But like everything that it affects, right, is the body. All of Taylor's bugs is the body.
Yeah. Oh my god, I totally don't know why I didn't think about that as like an additional sense.
And I mean, the idea of a sense gets even more complicated when you just have like normal power, like Trickster's power, right? Where he essentially like weighs different objects and can snap them between each other. But he describes it as if like there's a line between them, but or like a tether that's like vibrating.
Yeah.
But I think he doesn't actually like see it or anything. It just feels that way. He's using, yeah.
Fascinating.
It's like every time we get the description of how a power works and described to us, it's essentially like telling a blind man what color looks like.
Yeah.
Where you can sort of do it, but not really.
Yeah, it'd have to be very like synesthesia.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yes. All right. There was another. Okay, so this is the last little piece of theory that I wanted to pull from, but I felt like it was important to note from Judith Butler's. Actually, it's an essay about like performative acts and like gender constitution.
Okay.
It's not from her like big fancy gender theory book, but it's about like the concept of like gender as not being like a stable identity, right? So it's like it's rather this sort of it's like an identity tenuously constituted in time, right? So this is a quote: an identity instituted through a stylized repetition of actions, right? Like stylization of the body, and hence, like must be understood as like the mundane way in which like bodily gestures and movements and enactments of like various kinds of like of various kinds constitute the illusion, right, of an abiding gender itself. So there's this it's the way that one conducts oneself. This second wave like French feminist, Simone de Beauvoir, whose name I can never pronounce correctly, but she's a phenomenal writer about language too. She says one is not born, but rather like becomes a woman, because like there's all these like social aspects to like take in and enact. Yeah,
that gender is gender is a performance just like any other aspect of identity. Like, I remember in some of my classes in performance of literature, which was an intro course that was basically like performing poetry and stuff. But one of the things that it was emphasizing was of how when you are in class, you are performing the act of student, right? And when you go talk to your parents, you are performing the act of son or daughter or child or whatever else. And you kind of become a different person in every scenario that you're in. And this is just another aspect of that.
Yeah, it's really like we're very like unstable creatures, you know? Because like so much of what we are is reliant upon like doing, like we can't, even when we're being, there is that whatever type of verb tense, the ing of it, there's always movement even in stagnation.
Yeah, I almost want to push back against the idea of unstable and just liquid, because I feel like unstable implies like that we are set to fall apart at any moment. And I feel like for the most part we just slip into another role.
Yeah, that's a good term to use, liquid. Yeah.
We feel the shape of whatever role that we're in.
Yeah.
To really use the metaphor.
Visual metaphors are so wonderful, Yes. Glorious. But
that's a whole essay unto itself, which I feel like could happen after you read Packed and Pale. So do that.
Yes, I'm very excited about that. Also, I totally didn't mean to, but I was thinking about the concept of like literalizing, like becoming like tangible. And I feel like so much of the way that like costumes function in Worm is that sort of like making tangible pieces of individual identity. Specifically, I'm totally skipping to the very end but I really liked this point, so I'm going to bring it up now. Is like a huge amount of particularly this book, I think, but I mean it's pretty prevalent for like a lot of the story is like clothing and like costumes are this sort of, they're not just like a reinforcing or like a reflection of identity. They're like, when they change, there is this like they become the like material image of like moral or behavioral transformations of the characters.
Right.
So like the civilian, I'm gonna jump ahead and go to the civilian piece of it, of Taylor, like her sort of like evolution of civilian clothes really sort of reflects her own like mentality and like how she fits into her body and to her like her leadership and like positionality within the group and like within her different like within the variety of relationships that she has. Because the first sort of like transformative moment is back when her and Lisa are shopping, where they're talking about it, and she's kind of like, oh, I don't know, like this isn't what I usually wear. Like I can't imagine myself in this because it's like crop tops and like all of this, and like there's Lisa's talking about, she's like, you have the capacity to like make these bold choices, and I'm giving you these like physical pieces to sort of like, you know, wear it until you can, sort of thing. That very like the very Castiglione sort of thing of like, you can don this you know, get up or whatever, and by doing so you can sort of like place your mind in a place that you know allows you to make those more, you know, daring decisions.
I think her wearing different clothing like that certainly influenced her ability to, you know, go over to Brian's place and go in there with the idea of not just being a friend or not being entirely. I feel like she would have been much more uncomfortable had she not already been having that pressure on her. Yeah, it's sort of like the clothes sort of they almost sort of like lower the barrier of entry into this place of you know, like self-confidence for her. Yeah, because like so much of the beginning arcs is her sort of like thinking about how she is and who she is and how people are perceiving her and all of this, and she's like super aware of that. And then I mean, there's also like a whole bunch of other stuff that is occupying her mind now, but like the level of confidence and like the so little amount of thought we get when she's like dressing in the beginning of arc 20, where she's like putting on the strapless top and like the cargo pants, where she's just kind of like doing her little checklist, and she's got, you know, she's brushed her teeth, she's doing all huge amounts of other things. Yeah, they're not even decisions, they're just...
Yeah, it's just kind of...
She's just putting on clothes.
And then she goes downstairs and her dad's like, you're going to school like that? Like, what are you doing? Well, at least that's how I read it. He seemed slightly indignant. And she was just kind of like, what do you mean? Like, this isn't even something... It's
hot outside.
Yeah, like, what are you talking about? Yeah, so it's just this...
Where I think it's... just along those lines, at the very beginning, we have a lot of emphasis on her wearing these all-covering clothes, and like just, I mean, from the very first chapter, right, she has all that juice poured on her, and we make note of how there's stains all over her. I think it's like dark gray or dark brown or dark green hoodie. Yeah. Yeah, there's a level of like, there's almost like a reverse level of care, which seems so strange to think about it that way. Because, like, when she was so consciously thinking about what she's wearing and, like, how others were perceiving her in that more, like, self-conscious kind of way, it was almost like, I don't even know how quite to describe it, but, like, there was more awareness, but, like, less, like adventure, I suppose. I don't know that's not the term that I'm looking for, but, like, there was much more, like, practicality, I would say, or, like, caution. But then, like, later on when she isn't really thinking about what she's wearing, like, there is much more abandon in it. Yeah. So then there's, like, a level of, like, comfortability in this, you know, like, before it was very much, like, ill-fitting. And then now she's just kind of, like, unthinkingly comfortable. Which, although, like, later on we sort of see with the sundress, there's still that sort of, like, awareness of sort of, like, who she is and how she thinks about herself and, like, her like femininity, because like the sundress, she's like, oh, this is totally not me at all, like this is me blending in. Where she's like, oh, like I'll hide in plain sight, all of this, you know, I've got like this huge hat and the sandals and like all of this and like the shopping bags, and she's like so carefully cultivated an image of carefree, which there's this term that Castiglione uses in the Book of the Courtier, where it's called sprezzatura, which is this sort of like carefully cultivated like carelessness, which seems like an oxymoron, and it absolutely is. Where like you're supposed to like pretend that you don't care, but then like you have to be very, very, very careful about not caring. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it seems like she's sort of like created this, right? She's created this scenario on her little like outing. But then, well, it just, this journey, like this dress goes on such a journey, you know? Like it's only like maybe
2 chapters.
2 chapters? Does she, because she encounters the laborers, right? I don't remember when she encounters them.
She goes to meet Gru and Citrine. They have that meeting, which is and then she, wakes up and leaves.
Yeah.
And then she has a meeting with actually Miss Militia and Flechette and Perrin, I think, that same day.
She's still wearing the sundress? Because that totally changes that entire scene.
Mm-hmm.
So fascinating. But so she enters into that meeting, like, covered in sunscreen, all of this, like, it's very, like, fancifully, made into this, character, I would say, the sundress character. And then she, like, goes about business, kind of confronts this emotional moment between her and Gru, between her and Brian. And then we awaken and it's on, like, she kind of, like, adorns herself with the sundress, but then, like, now it's, like, grittier and, like, now it has, like, dirt on it and plaster and everything, and then she, like, has all the bugs all over her body, kind of, like, clean her, which is horrifying to think about.
Well, I mean, they're basically, like, just a bunch of hands and fingers. They're her own extensions of her body.
The concept of just, like, the visual image of this.
I mean, they are still bugs, and she didn't exactly wash them.
Yeah, they're still,
before.
Like, bugs. I mean, it's both horrifying and also, like, really fascinating and striking. Because she's kind of, like, clothing herself in both this, like, this facade that, like, has sort of, like, been, revealed to be so, right? This person that she's, like, dressing up to be isn't, like, that's not who she is. But, like, it's still, there's elements to it that are her, right? So now she has, like, the bugs and she's sort of, like, taking on this in less of, like, a theatrical way, I would say. Because now she's, like, got to go about business again.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, and then I feel like also the bugs sort of like contribute this sort of confidence that she didn't have when she was wearing just the sunscreen and summer dress, right? And then when she's like headed back, she has all of this like physically on her body, but then also she has like the construction workers come and like sit around her. So it's this almost like extension of her like authority on her way back.
Although I think they were doing it, because well, actually, I don't remember. I don't remember which way it settled. If it was just because she's a girl traveling alone or because they recognized her.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like it's both of those, though. Like, even whichever way it settled, like, her identity is sort of, kind of this, like, duality. Although she has, like, a large amount of power. But the image that she's, like, putting out, that she's, like, allowing to be reflected. But
yeah.
Yes.
So that is Taylor's civilian clothing.
That's true. Oh, before we get to anything else, because I put it in the civilian attire section, and I don't want to forget, because I'll definitely forget if I don't mention it now, is during Arc 22, the whole, like, we were talking about the, like, procedural things that she was kind of dealing with, like, with the shower and, like, having to don the clothes that she was handed and all of this, like, when she's
captured at the PRT.
Yeah, when she's at the PRT.
Held at the PRT.
She has been, like, stripped of, like, all the material pieces of her identity, right, of every single one of her identities. I mean, previously, like, we had that sort of, like, starting to devolve in Arc 20 with the high school scene, but, yeah, in this whole Arc 22, she's sort of, like, there is this like defamiliarization of herself just by going through these like particular motions that are kind of like acting upon her body, like upon her mind in the way that like the seed has definitely like kind of created those things to do. But it was sort of interesting because it's like this reversal of all of the like clothes and costumes that she's like donned over the.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that this is a moment where she, appears the most Taylor, right? But she is entirely Skitter. That is how they're treating her. They're not treating her as Taylor. Yeah. They're treating her as Skitter.
Yeah, it's particularly interesting. Sort of like tearing down, I think, of my entire argument about costumes and like how they contribute to like identity. Where like with her, like all that has been taken away, but like they're like she still is who she is, you know, like she still holds the like intrinsic pieces of herself, and like no amount of like material, you know, defamiliarization will be able to, you know, take those pieces away, because they're sort of like embedded within her. Oh, there was this wonderful thing that I read earlier about the concept of like space inside oneself, you know, like you gotta like, you don't have space outside of yourself, so you must build space within you, but not like, you know, like on this, you know, physical plane, but like just like space to exist and think and be, without the ing. But like, yeah, I feel like that's kind of what she has been sort of doing, in the addition of all these, like she's sort of been like preparing herself, I feel like. And I feel like every single one of the parahumans sort of have been preparing themselves to like kind of building this like interior self, because they live so much of their life in this sort of like shifting between identities. You know, there has to be like pieces of themselves that they hold on to.
Yeah, what are those consistent things that they I think one thing, the only object I can imagine that stays with Taylor all the time is her glasses.
Yes. Yeah, I wonder about those. You know, that's just...
because she put them in her goggles, too.
Yeah.
Which I think you could easily use as a metaphor for how she continues to view things in a bully victim dynamic, even when she's in costume.
Yeah.
Because her vision is literally that of her past self.
Yeah, she can just sort of like... she stays within the mentality, like the grooves and the path she's like already ridden so deep that like she can't really like unthink that. Yeah. But okay, so costumes, before we get terribly off track, and I definitely am going a very long time, I'm sorry.
That is okay. I mean, this is a fascinating topic. We honestly we could do a whole, like, the whole episode could just be about costumes and
so
looking at them in different ways.
interesting.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
But main points. Okay, so there's a variety of different ways that you know, the use of costumes are like used, and I feel like the whole of like the parahuman community is sort of like, they're reinforced by these costumes, like material garb, I would say, or like, you know, raiment or whatever, has like two different things. Like both it's sort of like obscuring or like mystifying individual identity or like specific identities, and then also like contributes to the creation of like a second or other self, right? Yeah.
That's what it does, like on an individual level, but then there's a whole nother level of sort of like accumulating, I would say, like social capital, you know, where because they well, not like explicit of like, oh, we're all gonna wear like this specific sign or like this specific color scheme, or I mean, I guess they sort of do that some, but like they can act as sort of like classifying into groups, you know, like thematically. Yeah.
Hey, actually, Accord notes when he meets the teeth, or I'm pretty sure is basically like, I think this was mentioned in other places, but basically on how teams often like they won't intentionally have a theme going into it, but just because they're around a bunch of other people, they end up subconsciously imitating or taking elements from one or another, and so they end up looking thematic if they're like a team that has been around for a while. So like the teeth, even though they like never ever like, you know, really, I mean, they like to look scary, but it's not like they're making fashion choices. They end up, you know, using a lot of skulls and red and other things like that. Yeah,
it's very much like a old married couple sort of thing, or like a owner and dog, where it's like you kind of inevitably end up looking like each other, you know? Yeah.
I think the Undersiders are another great example of that, where when they bring another... At the very beginning, there was no talk of like, this is how we look, right? There was none of that. But by the time they bring Perry in, they're like, okay, you need to change your costume to be black and threatening.
Yeah, that their costume saga is a really interesting one to me, because they all had like individual costumes before, and there was like a conversation like way at the beginning with Taylor about like making costumes, right, for like others, because they were all like intrigued by her like spider silk, right? And there was that conversation, but it didn't really come to fruition until like way later. Until the 15, I think,
right before Coil.
Yes, yeah, where they all kind of like gathered, and then she was sort of like thinking about it after they fought the Slaughterhouse 9, where she's kind of like lamenting, you know, that she hadn't like better outfitted the team, which I think was a really peculiar I think, observation in my mind, I suppose, because she was so very like dead set at the very beginning of like, you have to be the one to figure out about your costume, and like, you know, it's this like do or die of like, you should probably make it because if you don't, then you're lame, or like if you like put it together with stores and you like looked dumb, and she was very concerned about this concept of like not looking cool or sleek or whatever.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, we've previously mentioned a lot of those moments of like she's worried about looking cool or not looking lame or not sounding lame that carry over from high school when she's fighting giant monsters and murderous people, and she's still concerned about just sounding dumb.
Yeah, but then like later on, she's sort of like she's much more geared towards the practicality of it.
I wonder what the last time that Taylor refers to herself as saying something or being lame is, because I think that would be an interesting moment to find.
I don't know if I can think of any beyond the Leviathan attack. I feel like there must be a few.
I think there must be like a couple places, but not many more. Certainly by the end of the Slaughterhouse 9 arc, I think she's done. Yeah,
well, because she's sort of like fully come into her role as like the leader of the Undersiders. And I think at that point she's kind of like, there's no time to be worrying about these things. There's so much other stuff that we gotta do. Yeah. But the thing that I really wanted to note about her like crafting everyone else's dress, like all their costumes, is that she closed her team kind of like a cord in the terms of like she's the one that's like putting everything together. Which, I mean, for her it's much more like it's about the like care and protection of like her friends and all of this, and she like, I feel like though there is like an underlying like similarity of like the control over the materiality, I would say, or like
probably,
you know what I mean?
At least subconsciously of like
I don't think she would like actively be like, there is this, because she has that whole conversation with Rachel of like, well, Rachel's like, well, what are the strings attached to this? Because like I never get gifts without strings, and then she's like, well, nothing, you know, like it's fine. But there is, I mean, even if there's no other intention besides like, I've made you a costume, now we are a group and you can't leave the group sort of thing. Like, I feel like that sort of gift can't be totally unattached. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I mean, Rachel certainly would find it much more difficult in the wake of that to just take it and leave.
Yeah. It's sort of like a token of like loyalty, or like a guarantee of loyalty. Because I feel like that's kind of what happens with Perian. Like, once she buys into the team, they're like, okay, we're gonna like change your costume and everything, and
then you'll be one of us.
Yeah. And then Fletchite gets all mad because like she recognizes that indication of like by changing her costume, then Perian has accepted a great deal more of like behavioral and allegiance shifts. You know, something that's much more permanent than just like donning a new outfit. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I want to note real quick something that we haven't really talked about, Clarence, is how Flechette is sort of joining the Undersiders.
Yes. Yeah. Because she becomes her lieutenant, right? She becomes Perian's lieutenant.
Yeah. And Perian is an Undersider, which ergo
that's
means...
true.
I just wanted to note that.
That is something very... Oh, I'm kind of excited about that. Because she's a fun one.
Yeah.
I feel like she would fit in with all of them.
I wonder, that piece of metal that she punched into Taylor's shoulder, I wonder if it's still there post Scapegoat.
Oh. Does
not,
Flechette
right?
have like, can she like remove the darts that she is like...
I don't think so.
Okay, I didn't know if it was like a...
I think she could cut it out because her power would just like cut through everything around it.
Yeah.
But no. She can't just like plop it out, no. Because it's bonded.
Oh. Horrible. But also very cool.
But go on.
Anyways.
Yes, very cool. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yes. Oh, there was another thing that there was a couple of things that I was sort of like tracing through that I wanted to make a note of that I wasn't, I mean, I don't know if there's anything like to say about it, but I just feel like it's something that should be noted. Is that like when Taylor's making these costumes like for her like friends and allies and everyone, like the material and herself, like the material that she uses is the same that like she like weaponizes, you know? So there's this sort of like commonality, like everything is made to be into fighting gear, right? So it's like you're sort of like clothing yourself in like violent adornment.
Yeah.
And then it sort of like becomes even more literal when she uses like the bugs as like a makeshift mask and like that sort of thing, and like when Gru uses his like darkness as makeshift, you know. And then even I would say even like a further extension of that is like when the bodies are like individuals' bodies, like when they're altered in like trigger events, or like the case 53s, like there's this like you have become something that like is inherently violent, you know, or like inherently holds the potential for violence, you know what I mean?
Right. I mean, when Lung goes dragon mode, there's no talking anymore.
It seemed like a really fascinating thing of this concept of like, so readily do the costumes transition into pieces of like literal pieces of themselves, you know. And even still it's continuing down the same path of like obscuring identity. Just
as something more of a aside as well, I would find it very interesting to compare how Worm treats secret identities and costumes versus something like Batman, right? Because I think the line between each alter ego is much less stark than it is in like comics, especially with an example like Batman, where Bruce Wayne is an entirely different performance, like completely different to Batman. Like not only in like, you know, he's not fighting crime and stuff, and he's, you know, acting the part of a billionaire, but also as in like he's usually a little bit more, I don't know about cowardly, but like yeah, I mean, it obviously depends on the writer.
Yeah, but like the intrinsic bits don't necessarily carry over. Yeah.
Or Superman and Clark Kent, where he becomes like a cowardly person.
Yeah.
Just to differentiate himself.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
Where in Worm, I mean, I'm sure there are some examples of that, but almost entirely it's like it's more the kind of daily, I am now a student, I am now,
it's like, I gotta go to the grocery store, like I can't go dressed up in my garb, I want to wear a t-shirt and, you know, flip-flops or whatever. And so like they do act differently, and they are like, I mean, if you change if each ego you change their faces and voices and appearances, they would appear basically as, they wouldn't act the same, they wouldn't look the same, so they would basically be like different people. They are still like a lot more similar than characters in comics. Yeah. There's not quite as much. It's much more like superficial, the shifting. Yeah.
Of course, that's not always true. Like Peter Parker and Spider-Man are usually pretty aligned. But yeah.
Yeah, but there's usually much more like harsh line drawn. But I feel like it's also because this community is so large. Like the parahuman community, like it's an entire world that like you can't just like not be a part of, I guess. You know, like it's just like a whole nother register of like existing in like a group setting. It's not just like an individual kind of lonely existence. I mean, I guess some of them do live in, but you know what I mean. Oh, okay. So I also really wanted to talk about the gala attire for Accord's minions.
Yes.
Because just like in terms of like physical fighting, that's like really, really impractical. Like to be fighting in like a suit or like a dress. I don't know. It's so strange because he's one who's like always about solving problems and like being very like, you know, like anticipating every single detail. And I feel like that's a detail that he should have anticipated. And
they're not even like actually they're super armored suits or whatever, or actually they actually hide a bunch of knives in them or anything like that. No, they're this is just very nice clothing.
So peculiar because
I wonder if like after every outing they basically have to make a new one because it's been stained with mud and fire and stuff.
Yeah, like I mean, how do they like go about transport? Do they like walk around? Do they take the bus? I don't know. And they're like, what do you do? Anyways, we don't need to go into the details of it. But what I wanted to pick out specifically was what it said about like, because he's always like needing to solve every problem, right? And he's like seeking out these like very specific individuals that well, if we look at like Citrine, right? He's like there's this sort of like embodiment, or like I feel like there's a commentary about like idealized beauty, and like his definition of what is perfect is like a very limited definition. You know what I mean? Where it's like there's specific manifestations of like particular human bodies and attributes and clothes and everything that, like, I don't know, it seemed the fact that he sought out this, like, perfection was, like, almost like a flaw, you know what I mean? In his, like, solving of problems. Because, I mean, they're not, like, by taking on these, like, you know, clothes and, like, with her, she's, like, wearing the yellow makeup and, like, all this, like, there is this sort of, like, smoothing of, like, human imperfections into, like, this idealized beauty that doesn't really, like, exist.
Yeah.
You know?
He just wants to bring the world into order, which includes every human body around.
Yeah.
Even though order is not really something that can be attained.
Yeah, especially with human bodies. Like, we're, like, it's so disorderly and I don't know, like...
Yeah, I mean, he's bothered by, like, everything. I mean, she ends up breathing a little bit too hard because, I don't know how to say this, but because of, you know, the effect that he's having on her.
Yeah.
And that ends up bothering him a little bit too.
Yeah, see, like, I don't know, like, he's, like, searching for perfection in places that it doesn't exist, you know? Which I suppose that's sort of, like, his life, that he's, like, stuck searching for, like, order in a place that is absolutely no order at all. It's full of chaos.
Yeah, just as an extension of that, and going along with costumes, when the travelers meet him, right, part of his, like, in exchange, I will, you know, let you be here, and I will provide you a set of costumes. I think basically, like, the providing them a set of costumes is, like, not even a favor to them at all. It's like
requirement.
It's basically, I need you to look themed.
Yeah.
I cannot have you not be themed like this.
Yeah, it's very much like this, like, prerequisite of, like, any sort of interaction with him, which I feel like does speak to, like, if he's like having to, like, actively change individuals to make them into this, like, more ordered, you know, aesthetic, I guess. I guess that speaks to, like, the looseness, I guess, of group, you know, like, themes, which I suppose each individual still holds. Like, that does raise the question, though, like, about the identities of each of his, like minions. That's a terrible word to use, but like, you know, his, like,
his ambassadors.
Yeah, there you go, ambassadors. About that, like, their identity is really not, like, there isn't space for them to fully
express
express their identity, because they're sort of, like, stuck in this sort of, like, painted on perfection.
Yeah. The only thing that really is them is that this is their power, right? And that their power is reflected in their clothing. However, they weren't born with the power. It is, like, affected by them, right? Yeah. It is special to them, but it is a cauldron vial.
Yeah, it's still, like,
where
prescribed.
It's not as an inherent.
Yeah.
And it's, like, immediately controlled with requiring a name and a costume and things like that a court chooses, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, everything is, like, placed upon them or, like, handed to them, and their agency is kind of taken away. Yeah,
they don't get a chance to make it their own.
But, okay, so we're going to do the very end of... I had some other things, but I'm not going to talk about them. I just want to talk about the Weaver costume, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. Okay, so the Weaver costume at the end is particularly interesting, I think, because we've sort of, like, in terms of, like, identity, we've sort of been, like, shedding identities as we go along. Taylor has, because, like, first she said she's like, she kind of discards her identity as Taylor completely, or I wouldn't say she, like, completely discards. She kind of tucks it away and is like,
sure,
this isn't going to be a public identity anymore. And then sort of, like, goes along as Skitter for a while, which, like, there is, like, a very significant shift in her behavior, like, her inhibitions. She's sort of, like, fully embraced her identity as villain and, like, warlord or whatever. And then once she reaches the end of it, and she kind of goes through this sort of, like, you know, stripping away of identity in terms of, like, material adornment. During the cell arc, she sort of, like, is, like, creating this space. I mean, not during the arc, like, that's very, like, full of tension and all of this, but, like, by the end of it, she has enough space to sort of, like, you know, place upon herself a new identity. Because, I mean, it seems seemingly we sort of postulated that she could have been, like, chewing along on the concept of Weaver for a while, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's something that perhaps she has been making room for, you know, and then now she has this, like, you know, new costume and, like, this, you know, rebranding of herself, I would say. Sort of the costume sort of, like, acts as this, like, you know, a way to, like, discipline her body to sort of like remind herself into.
That she's no longer Skitter. She is Weaver now.
Yeah. Or like costume, like her costume meaning sort of like, precludes, I think, her actions,
Yeah. Before she becomes a hero, she's already wearing the hero costume.
There's another piece to that was very important. Oh, the other thing about it is she doesn't make it.
Yeah.
She's given it by Dragon, which I feel like is very significant because she made like a huge deal about the concept of her making her costumes. And like throughout, she's like been the one to sort of like change things around and like make sure that she has been the sole, maker of everything that she wears and like, her utility belt and everything. Like she's always thinking about her own ability to hone her array of like options, And now with this, like it's very interesting that she had no, say in what she's wearing.
Yeah. She didn't pick the color scheme or anything at all. Yeah. And I think it's also just significant just the fact that it's not spider silk. It's just generic costume material. Yeah. She's no longer armored, at least right now.
Yeah, so she doesn't have those like expected, invulnerabilities. Yeah, very intriguing, I think, as she sets out to do her new hero work.
Something surely to keep in mind.
Yes. And I wanted to talk about like Defiant and Dragon inhabiting the same space, but I don't know. I kind of want to hold on to that.
Yeah, I think that's something that will definitely come up again, and we can kind of use the understanding of costumes and stuff that we've understood here the next time we talk about that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to leave it open because I feel like there's more to say about those two. Yeah, but yeah. So that's my sort of very long treatise about costumes.
And it's funny, I think that's just like a good starting point, right? Yeah. Like I don't think we've even explored everything that we can talk about with Taylor and costumes,
yeah, I know.
Much less, all of the other characters.
I know, there's just so much that you could like delve into.
Yeah, and I think I'm thinking of a couple particular things later on, or things or people or powers. I'm making it vague for you, but I'm pretty sure the audience is going to understand what I'm talking about. Where this idea of costumes is really and how it makes up identity and stuff is emphasized. I think I'm imagining two already. Ooh. Yes.
Well, I'm.
But bonus points if you can guess which ones I'm talking about. Put it in the comments section below. Okay. So anything else that you want to mention before we move on?
I think that's it.
Okay, that's it. It was only an hour and 20 minutes.
So long. I'm so sorry.
Content.
It's
okay.
So much to say.
I'm sure no one's going to complain. Okay, so in this in-between bit, before we get to mine, we have, this time it's not a lighthearted little mini thing, but a little concept that we want to go into, kind of related to the stuff above. Do you want to explain it, Clarence?
Okay, so I got really excited about this concept with, like, Dinah and Coyle, because Taylor was, like, really quick to point out the like, peculiar, or, like, the, like, very unique way, I guess, that Dinah was like constructing her language and like kind of how she thought and like how she spoke. And there's this particular term, idiolect, that means like the specific like individual way of speaking, like this accumulation of all the interactions and dialects that one has encountered that kind of like get meshed together into individual ways of speaking and thinking and writing. And I felt like that was a really interesting thing to sort of comb through some of the characters in Worm, because I feel like language and alienation to language, I would say, is like I feel like is a common theme.
Yeah, so you had a couple examples here. I mean, we could start with Dinah and Coyle, basically, of how Dinah's using phrases or phrasing things in ways that Coyle would, which is very, strange for a 12-year-old. And it's even after she leaves his clutches, like when she goes and confronts Tag, she's still kind of using that sort of language, that can sort of symbolize how he still kind of has a hold on her from the past.
Yeah, like how deeply his influence has like sort of like been carved into her mind. Is that like the way that he speaks is like structuring her thought process.
Yeah.
But I don't know. She had a really interesting way of speaking too. Like it sounded a little bit old,
Mm-hmm.
Like not terribly old, but just like old enough to be like noticeable, especially if it's like a child speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, contrast with like Imp, who is only slightly older, or even Vista, who kind of is in a somewhat similar place. Actually, like in my mind, they almost look the same, which is interesting. But Vista sort of putting on. I wouldn't say she's like putting on airs or anything like that. She's not. I didn't notice in her language her like intentionally trying to use big words or stuff like that to feel bigger. But the same sort of thing of like, I mean, being slightly more formal than someone of her own age should be.
Yeah. I don't know if she, like Vista, I don't know if she deliberately, I mean, she does like deliberately sort of like, place herself in a different, like a higher social position than, but I don't know if she like actively thinks about her language, like her own language. I feel like she spends a lot more time thinking about, everyone else's language around her and how they sort of like, how they speak to her versus how they speak to everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think she's so like sensitive to it that phrases and things that would be ambiguously condescending, like something like a phrase that in one context can be condescending, but in this context is not, are always to her classified as condescending. Yeah. Like when she talks to Yamada, like some of the things that she's like when Yamada talks about, you could be a field therapist. There are certainly contexts and people who would say a phrase like that in a very condescending way, but Yamada is not using it this way. But because Vista is so, she pays so much attention to it, she's always kind of assuming that and always fighting against it. It is classified as that.
Yeah. She's just like hyper aware of how she's perceived, and sort of like alters herself accordingly. Yeah. But okay, so there's another group, or actually, well, first a duo, that sort of have this like influence on each other about how they like interact. And that's Burn Scar and Labyrinth, which we don't see a lot of Labyrinth speaking, but we see a lot of her communication via like visual construction, which I mean wouldn't ordinarily be like placed within like a language, but I feel like in this particular duo it would, because they have, I mean, even if it's just referential, they have sort of like developed a way to speak to each other through this sort of interaction, whereas of like
her surroundings sort of like speaking and sending a message. Gotcha. I mean, I think pretty explicitly when Burn Scar is there, the message is, you remind me of that place.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very like sort of heartbreaking moment between the two of them, but like, I don't know, it just seemed like a really fascinating like nonverbal way to sort of like articulate this like shared past trauma. Yeah. Which I don't know if that's like, if you have to make a distinction between like communication and language.
I mean, I would classify anything that like a power is doing basically as another form of body language.
Yeah. Oh, that's...
Although, I don't know how I would classify that in idiolect.
Yeah.
Because does idiolect just refer to like the transcribed text of someone saying things, or does it also include the tone and emphases that people are using?
I feel like it
I would argue it should
count
does. Those.
Because
when
you think about like dialect kind of relies upon the way that people speak and like the cadence that they hold and that sort of thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's what I think.
At the very least, it cannot be understood without also understanding how tone and speech pattern affects the things being said.
Yeah. And then the other group that I wanted to bring up were the Case 53s, like Gregor the Snail and like Neuter and Sveta. Yay! Yeah, where they all have like, they hold pieces of their past self, like these vestigial language, elements or like linguistic idiosyncrasies that have no reference at all. So it's just like meaningless past. I don't know, or like jumbled past. So like, I don't know. I feel like it's like the pieces of the DNA that we like cart around in ourselves, and like that that we just like don't need, but like we have no way of like processing it or like not keeping it, you know?
Yeah.
So they're just sort of like stuck with this past that they are super disconnected to.
Yeah. I think Gregor, I think at this point you know that a lot of the Case 53s are people snatched from other worlds, right? Like Alexandra was doing that.
Yeah.
So I think the implication, like when we look back at Gregor's, is that he was taken from another world and his language is like Scandinavian, related, but it's not a language that exists on this earth.
Yeah, which is so fucking cool. Just, there's all these like whole other worlds that have like so many new languages. Like, what if there's a world that like there wasn't like the Columbian Exchange, and then all of those like people who were living on the Americas, like all of them, like what if they all like still held on to all of their languages, like the huge amount of like biodiversity, like what if or like there were a variety of different species of the genus Homo, and like all of them developed language, and it became even more diverse, and we aren't like, there's so many anyways, we don't need to go down that path. I'll go way far down.
Excellent questions to ask,
but very fascinating. I feel like very jarring though to be handed like a language and a voice and like things that you don't know what to do with and you can't ever make sense of.
Yeah, I think there's an implication that a lot of Case 53s are basically handed an understanding of English or probably whatever language they, wherever they were dropped off. Because otherwise it's like, Gregor could have like learned, but
true.
Sveta as well, and Neuter as well, and so many others, and Weld. And, It's interesting. I don't think Weld has an accent that we know of.
Oh, yeah.
I think he might have like maybe a New Yorker accent, but...
Yeah, because like how old was he?
I think he was like just like 3 years younger or something than he is now or something. Relatively recent that he was dropped off, but he wasn't like a child either.
Okay. So he didn't really have too much time to sort of like develop into...
Yeah.
Although, I don't know. Accents can get acquired really fast.
That's true. At the very least, we don't have any mention of him knowing any other languages.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, and then the last one that I wanted to mention real fast was the concept of like that like more like limited or like nonverbal communication that was present within like the Nine with like Mannequin and then the Siberian, this sort of like this sort of, and then Brinskar does, but then I feel like also there's like a sort of like lyricism or like whimsy to like the communication of Bonesaw. That that's definitely verbal, but like there is this sort of like nonsensical element to like a lot of their communication.
Yeah, I think Bonesaw is a really great example of looking at Idiolect because it's the way that she speaks is very, very intentional. She is intentionally putting on this air of an innocent child because it pleases Jack, because they find it ironic and things like that. She does the whole no swearing thing, right? Even though later on during Blasto's interlude, she gets, speared through the chest or whatever. And I think she says fuck, right there, which is really just like a great example of her act just dropping. But very often she a turn of phrase that she uses very often is like Jack says, Jack tells me, or whatever, just calling that back. And this is another example, kind of like Dinah, of this authority always coming into her language, albeit in a different way.
Yeah. But there is this sort of like structuring of herself and the way that she speaks around the authority. Yeah.
I think, that's something to pay attention to, for sure. Well,
did you have any other ones that you wanted to bring up?
No. Those were the ones, basically. I think Mannequin's also just an interesting one where I think just that kind of nonverbal communication where it's super almost like interpretive is really interesting because for the most part, he only speaks in like yes and no, right? When he's talking to Armsmaster, which kind of ends up, because these people are kind of guessing at what he's trying to communicate, it sort of becomes where they are speaking for him. And they kind of have influence over what is said, because you can kind of imagine where someone says something that is close, but not exactly what he meant or what he would have said if he could, but he just says yes anyway, because it's like, yeah, that is something that I want to agree to. I do want you to understand that message, even if it's not the one I was currently trying to set out right now.
Oh, that sounds
another
so
example. Well, he kills the people that don't get it right. Sure. So, the other one that I am thinking of is, of course, Victoria in the asylum.
Yeah.
Where and it's entirely someone else. It's not speaking for her. She gets to choose, but a lot of interpretation in this extremely... she has to modify her language probably to be as short as possible because otherwise it's exhausting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's exhausting as is, but...
Yeah, the language element is... You can't really be verbose.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's what we have for language. If any of y'all have any examples of interesting bits of language or how language is structuring, how a character is speaking is sort of structuring the way that they're viewing the world, go ahead and tell us about it. But okay, let's get into my section, and then we'll finish up this episode. So I'm going to be looking at, I wanted to talk about the rhetoric of place and basically use Worm as a way to learn how we can use an understanding of rhetoric to look at the world and kind of the messages that we are receiving when we go to places. And memorials, in particular, there's 3 memorials in this section, up to the section of Worm that I'm thinking of, that happenstance have all to do with Leviathan, which I think is just a fun coincidence. But memorials in general are a really great example because not only are they, messages, but they're also constructions of a community identity. Whoever is going to view the memorial. And there's a lot of talk about memory and what that means and how memory and history are constructed. But real quick, just to the background premise, which is basically, we've said this with a bunch of our theorists already, but that at all times we are receiving messages that are persuasive in the way of like they are to change your mind into a certain direction, and like the rhetoric of the shirt you are wearing or the shape, like what a car looks like, right? Basically, every single object around you, and you went into this in your section, is informing the way that you are constructing the world and assuming what is the normal. So the main place where I'm pulling a lot of this talk about memory is a book called Places of Public Memory, The Rhetoric of Museums and Memorials, which is edited by Greg Dickinson, Carol Breyer, and Brian L. I think Ott is how you pronounce that. It pulls together a lot of theorists into who are talking about this sort of thing into one location. Clarence,
which is always so nice.
Yes, it's convenient. In our rhetoric teacher's class, we went over this sort of thing. We talked about, I'm sure you wouldn't remember the name because I already have forgotten. Did I write it down?
We talked about...
But it was basically talking about like how the French are, how memory and
the national
history,
memory,
the differences between memory and history and how they interact. So she is like cited as a source in this book. So like I remember I was actually reading through it and I was like, wait a second, I've read this before. And then I looked down at the handout that I had and I was like, oh, that is exactly the same. Interesting. Anyway, so the point that there's a lot of stuff about just places in general, but emphasis on museums and memorials as these really intentionally constructed spaces that are usually constructing a past and different forms of the past. So from the book, quote, all symbolism harbors the curse of immediacy, for it represents, not represents, represents, or perhaps creates the reality it purports to capture or copy. So basically, this is more applicable to museums, but it does to memorials too, where they are trying to represent something else, right? A museum, has an exhibit on, I don't know, what's something that would be applicable? I don't want to say like the Holocaust, that's like much, but let's say like...
We could say...
The Civil War. Let's say the Civil War. That's a good... It harbors enough controversy to be significant. Where entirely depending on like what objects are brought out and where the emphasis is, it's an entirely different construction of that war. I mean, if an exhibit has more evidence of like the injuries or the kinds of weapons that were used, that shows like the violence of it. But you could also just as easily bring out letters from soldiers or uniforms and things like that to kind of portray it and make the war feel like a romantic thing. Or
there could be like a whole other narrative of like the medicine of the war and like versus like the contemporary how behind America was versus like other like medical progressions. There's so many narratives that can be constructed in like the pieces of the past that we have.
And there is no way to completely capture the past as it was, because for that to happen, you would need everything from the past. You can only pick out pieces. And
then I feel like...
And you never know...
I feel like there's also like the addition of like, we will never be able to fully separate or present an objective narrator, because whoever it is, when retelling a tale, like, you cannot take yourself out of the narrative, because you are bound by your own perspective. No matter how much you intake and present other people's, you're still kind of stuck in your own mindset. Yeah.
When you look at a photo of the past, you are not just seeing the past, you are also seeing the location of which you are seeing the past. And that does not necessarily like just the image of, sitting at a desk or whatever affects your view of the past, but the knowledge that you are in this moment of the 21st century. You are viewing a artifact that has lasted throughout however long. You can't remove yourself from that. So on that, people use the past and memory to construct and understand the present. Like, that is the purpose of memory, because understanding the past alone by itself, it does not exist on its own. It always exists in a way that informs how we view the present. And so here I kind of want to go into the distinction between history and memory as these theorists speak of it. So history is more emphasized on like the material evidence of like, these are the events that occurred, right? Where memory, and public memory especially, which is kind of like the shared construction of the past, is more on the affect, the feeling, the connotation, the significance of things that happened in the past, which are not necessarily tied to what literally happened. Like, that memory and the effect of the past on the present is entirely predicated on the stories that we have been told. Like, if we are not told what really happened in the past, we're just told a story about what happened in the past. The story has more effect than the actual events that actually occurred. Or at the very least, a comparable amount. Like, if you were told that World War II never happened, but then you look at the world and like it has been affected by World War II, it's it's a complicated mix of it has affected, but anyway.
No, but there's definitely like there's a different perception of particular events based on the narratives that have been told about it.
So the writers cite David Lowenthal, who I don't know anything about. I just know he said it in this because I didn't do enough research. So, quote, "We select, distill, distort, and transform the past, accommodating things remembered to the needs of the present. The prime function of memory, then, is not to preserve the past, but to adapt it as to enrich and manipulate the present." So, again, emphasizing that when we're remembering things, it's not just to look back and just see how it was back then. It's never done in a vacuum of motivation. It's always done with a purpose here in the now to explain how things are working right now. And that includes the recent past. And that includes the far distant past. And it's always, as he's saying, changed from a past retelling to this one. The different things are emphasized and brought out.
I feel like...
so last one...
I was thinking a prime example of that is this particular archaeological site in Ayodhya, I think, in India, that had both like a Hindu temple and then also a mosque, and based on different archaeological like findings, sort of like both held like a specific amount of importance. And so it's sort of like depended on which one was given precedent based on like, present individuals who were like, kind of telling the tale, or like, supporting the specific interpretation of that like area's history, like which narrative is like given precedent.
Yeah. And another important thing, so when I was talking about history, I was emphasizing the material, the things that actually happened. It's also important to note that as we understand history, it also is completely impossible to fully understand and get the complete picture. So both memory and history are both incomplete and malleable, and the word I'm looking for is not corruptible, but unstable at the very least. Yeah.
So the last thing I want to quote, perhaps?
Revisable, that would work too, yeah. The last quote I want to bring out before we get into nitty-gritty of, well, that's actually, I hate that phrase, actually. Why did I say it? I hate that phrase. Of applying this to Worm. So Michel Foucault, who's also cited in this, because of course he is, said, everything is never said, which is kind of, it was related to, like Derrida's, idea of difference, right? Which is, every word, every sign is defined by what it is not, right? Yeah. But in other applications, so quoting from the book, rhetoricians can use this phrase to understand as that rhetoricians can use that phrase to understand rhetoric and symbolism as formed as important and normal, right? Like everything that is in this current moment is the normal. It is what is important. To the fact that you live in this particular house or that you're listening to this podcast is normal. By its contrast with all those infinite things that are not being said, not being done, not being perceived, not being reacted to.
Yeah.
So that I'm saying this and not literally anything else emphasizes that this is the important one. And this is what is normal, acceptable.
Yeah.
This is more applicable when we're looking at stuff like nations, right? Which are actually like, totally completely unnatural and intentionally created, but also like accidents and arbitrary. But because we live in them, they do feel natural and normal.
Yeah.
Right. Because they are not happening. So let's go and apply this to Worm. So the three memorials that I'm looking at here are the Captain's Hill Memorial, the portraits in the PRT headquarters,
yes,
and the time bubble with the quote-unquote three heroes trapped in it. So on looking at what is, how these memorials emphasize what is present over what is not, right? And the three memorials that we do see, and the only memorials for the Leviathan attack that we know of, only parahumans are memorialized, even though tons of civilians died. Presumably, there's probably some sort of civilian memorial, or perhaps the Captain's Hill Memorial is intended to...
It's meant to, like...
represent that, right?
The sort of, like, unnamed soldier sort of thing.
Yeah, but in either case, it does emphasize that it is the heroes and villains who are represented, or it is the parahumans who fought that are the representations of all of the rest of humanity. Yeah. They are the most significant members, and that is the normal state. The fact that it is their names and not everyone else, because they are the most important people here. Which, I mean, in some sense, they fought, but people still died, right?
Yeah, there's still like an element of like public mourning.
Yeah,
that extends beyond just like the ones who saved you.
In 2 out of 3 of these memorials, hero and villain are side by side, undifferentiated, right? The memorial is very, very intentionally, and although it doesn't really matter if it's like, there's a political reason for how the memorial, just has the names and nothing else, but it doesn't really matter that there was a political reason. What's important is that it is this way. What is the message that is giving off from that? And it's essentially how so that's how it is on the memorial. In the time bubble, the 3 inside, when Taylor goes visits them, she says that there's 3 heroes inside. But one of them, Alabaster, was actually an Empire 88 villain. And this is mentioned like during the fight.
Oh, interesting.
But not at all during when she goes and visits. Yeah. And I think this is because they're like frozen at their moment of highest heroism, right? They're fighting Leviathan. You can't really get much more hero than that, right? And that idea of when you fight a class S threat, you are no longer a hero or a villain. You are just a cape.
Yeah.
And it reinforces that cops and robbers thing that like, this is why, we keep them around. This is why all of the horrible things that they've done, it doesn't matter because they're saving us.
Yeah.
I think another example of this that's not a memorial, but just of the concept is during the Leviathan fight, Bastion, who, you know, his backstory is he has some controversy for like being racist, but he's still a hero. He sacrifices himself, which Vissa has to do, which is not super cool, but...
yeah, that poor kid is probably walking around with so much... She has so much trauma.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she's already killed someone. And her power is not even murderous. Yeah. It doesn't even affect people. He did that in the hopes of post-fight having all his misdeeds and his sins like washed away in death.
This sort of like martyr, not martyr like, but like sacrifice as like absolution or something.
Yeah.
Or as like public absolution of any crime. Yeah.
And that idea is reinforced in these memorials, but it's probably something that has been reinforced in memorials in the past too. So, extending off of that, though this is a feature of all memorials, right? It only values those who died or disappeared. It doesn't celebrate any of those who fought but lived. So for an event like this, especially where a lot of emphasis is focused on the individual rather than like a war memorial where there's tons of people, this definitely does put a lot of weight on that sacrifice. So while Class S threat participants definitely gain more like ethical clout, right? Where like Skitter certainly, she throws it around in the cafeteria scene and heroes do as well, saying, I fought Leviathan, I fought the Slaughterhouse 9, I fought Echidna, I have earned my right to convince you of whatever. But at the same time, it's not nearly, it's not as much respect as the people who died fighting those get.
I feel like too it's because in those moments there is a suspension of those identities, and any sort of deed that is done outside of those moments, like everyone becomes someone who is fighting for the entirety of the community in that moment. But then once it's over, all of those strictures sort of like reappear, you know, and like the weight and like the actions that Skitter has done outside of that aren't forgotten, you know? Yeah. And it becomes part of the past. Which, but I think that's that idea of transformation that you just mentioned, of when they're fighting Leviathan, that they are now all on the same team, right? Which you don't name hero or villain, you just named like the side of humanity. That Alabaster was frozen in the time bubble at that moment means that, I mean, he's not even actually dead yet, right? He's just, he's frozen. He's frozen in that moment where he is on our side. And so we kind of classify him continually in that identity, even if now we're no longer in that moment. We are no longer in the moment of fighting Leviathan, but because that is where he still is. Yeah, he holds on to that like moniker.
He still is a hero. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting that they sort of just like adopt that identity because they're...
And they don't let go of it, in the post Slaughterhouse 8, in the post Arc 8 arcs, we don't really hear anything about heroes having any sort of memorials or celebrations like that gala that we had in Arc 6, which, to modify, there's a chance that it did happen and we just didn't see it. Also, the atmosphere is probably like way too somber for it, and maybe it's just not appropriate given the city's destruction.
Yeah, because that's sort of like they use that as like a gathering of all the big and fancy people, and presumably a lot of them are not in Brockton Bay anymore.
But either way, I do wonder, like, what was the recognition given to the living participants of that fight? Did they like maybe just have a somber like dinner or something, or I don't know. Did they get anything? Yeah,
was it just sort of like a let's move on immediately sort of thing?
Yeah, like,
well, because it seems like there was a lot of like chaos and need to you know be in the midst of helping the city recover, like the second that it was over. So I feel like so many, and then like, I mean, we see when we have the Boards arc where they like they're all so raggedly run. I don't know. I feel like it would be so difficult to sort of like stop and have a moment to mourn.
Yeah, and like in real life, for moments of enormous heroism like that, like the country rewards that by, you know, giving medals and having days dedicated to that and stuff. And I don't think there's a Parahumans Day where they celebrate that they fought like Endbringers. And I don't know if any of them get medals, but it's like, yeah, they are seriously risking their lives every time that they go. Yeah. And if they don't die, I don't know if they get celebrated.
I do wonder though, like,
so
because we have identified specific days that we have that we have marked in our history to remember. You know, that like every year we think about that, like those particular things on that day, and like, I don't know, it makes me wonder if that's what they've done too for like Endbringers. I think because they know, like Taylor was like listing them off. Yeah.
I don't know. That's interesting.
If they hold, if it's just like a thing that people know, or if it's like there's something that like they always talk about it on that day or that sort of thing.
Yeah, I wonder. Like, I'm certain that it's not like the same significance that Americans now have for 9/11, where there's an entire moment of silence because there would just be way too many.
Oh, that's true. That's
of these
true.
Days. Like every 3 months, there's a new one for humanity, if not for the United States specifically. And it also makes me wonder, like, do they remember like particularly horrible outside of the United States ones? I think she does, right? Because Newfoundland and Kyoshi, I think, are mentioned, which makes. I mean, those are pretty significant. Where, you know, he sunk entire islands, but yeah. So as a consequence, I think, of this emphasis on sacrifice, and just death in general of these memorials, as like the few places that parahumans are really, really celebrated, or really get a chance to be celebrated for this sort of thing. Like, just to look at effects, we already talked about Bastion, you know, doing his sacrifice thing, but also related, Vista, right? I think when she's looking at her fellow wards memorials, she ends up, you know, imagining a future that ends inevitably in death. And she has that sort of fatalism. And I think the fact that, the only time that members are remembered is after they've died. Yeah, it's sort of, it becomes like a expectation of like, of course I'm going to die. That eventually you will give your life, for humanity, so let's get into each of those locations in particular. And so I basically want to treat them as if they were real life objects and affecting real life people. So saying this, I'm acknowledging that these are not real life objects affecting real life people. They're in reality, their only effect is the effect on the narrative on us, and the effects that Wildbow has chosen them to have on characters and the world. So, like, I'm going to be listing things that, you know, if you look at the text, maybe aren't exactly happening, but if they were in the real world, I think would be. And it's because I think it's useful for us to practice on these fictional objects so that we can use this in the real world whenever we visit an actual memorial or museum or just look at a building, right? Yeah. When we enter into these places of like public memory, we can have this sort of like in the back of our mind. Yeah. So starting with the Captain's Hill Memorial, the first thing I think is significant is its location. It's located on this hill, which is, you know, has a history already in the city. I don't know if this is mentioned in this part of the story, but it's hardly a spoiler to mention that it's where basically the city is, you know, mythologized to have been founded there. That the captain of the ship or whatever, like said that it would be founded there. So it's already got this past, which now has the significant moment of a city planted atop it. It's separate from the city, but within sight of it. And so it's like this place of memory is disconnected from the actual like trauma that has happened. As it's one of the few places untouched by the aftermath of the destruction, as if to say that like these deaths will not be blemished by the reality. Oh, that's very interesting. And it looks on it has this view of the city as if to say, look, this is what we saved, right? But at the time when Taylor visits it, it's pretty ironic, as the city was not saved that well. There's that giant crater in the middle, as well as just everything's flooded and probably like collapsing. But I think the idea is that one day far in the future, they'll have this like sort of beacon. And be able to look at the city and be like, we did save it. look, these lives were sacrificed to give you the city that is now shining over there. And we've already mentioned the stuff about the names being undifferentiated, this just long list. It's also just a little note of how this is more circumstance, but again, circumstance has, effects rhetorically that all of the names are parahuman name, cape name, and then secret identity if known and released, when very often they aren't. So for a lot of them, they're just remembered as capes and nothing else. Yeah,
it's interesting because it's like their one identity has completely taken over everything, Yeah. That does make me wonder, though, like, are there individuals who don't know that their loved ones are capes? And
they just disappear
one day? Do they just, like, assume that they just kind of were taken in the
Well, what I think is even more of a question is if they were an out-of-town cape.
Oh, that's horrible. So you're just sort of, like, left in this unknowing of, somebody's never...
Yeah. I expect a lot of like the immediate family members, the PRT, like would tell, unless if like they were specifically told not to or something. But like, what if you were just like their coworker or something?
Yeah, you just sort of wonder.
Yeah, where'd they go? If they were a classmate. Yeah. So moving on to the ward portrait memorials. So if you remember right, these are, I'm going to just read the section, 3 feet high and 2 feet wide. The pictures were black and white, bordered by foot-wide black frames. The pictures themselves were head and shoulders shots of Aegis and Gallant, both in costume, masks on. She knew from her own experience that the pictures would have been taken in their first week on the team. Gallant looked so young. He had still been so young when the tidal wave had smashed into him and caved in his chest, only 17. And then she looks at her own picture, which she views as very childish. She hates that. So, number one, they are all in costume, emphasizing, of course, that the important aspect of the sacrifice is that of the superhero, not necessarily of the person and personality that is also lost. Like, a whole person is gone, but the important thing, the thing that we are memorializing, the thing that we are going to remember them as, is that superhero that had the power and was saving people. So this is also reflecting on Vista and all the other heroes, this fact that Yamada laments that they view their powered alter ego as far more important than their simple civilian identity. And the other thing is that these portraits of them are younger, right? And it's them at this sort of peak of innocence. Sounds like too much, but it's like this intense hope of the future before any of them got a chance to grow jaded. It's like they are a new hero. They're here to save the day. They're here to stay with everyone. And they're a kid hero. That's like the most hopeful hero you can have. Yeah,
it's really interesting that it's from their first week on the team. That there's just like, I mean, she's thinking about her, like, the childish of her image, but like, I don't know, like, I feel like there's like a naivety, to an image that's, I don't know, which I feel like it makes it even more painful. Is that we don't have the image of like the jaded, 17-year-old. It's like this kid, and then it's just so large, 3 feet high with like foot wide frames,
larger than life. And it's just their face too. It's just like a portrait, so it's not like just a life-size picture.
Like, the size of it is so imposing, but then coupled with this like sort of naive young image of these two, like it's very like juxtaposed, I suppose. And they're just black and white too. I wonder how long they're intended to stay up. Another significant just another little note is Browbeat, which you might even have forgotten. He's kind of a meme in the community of just being forgotten, but regardless, seems vaguely familiar.
So it doesn't really matter. He doesn't matter.
It's so sad.
So he dies during the Leviathan fight. The only other time we see him anytime before this, I think, is during the bank robbery, where he doesn't really do anything. And it says basically that this was basically his first week. Like, from...
Yes.
That's another little shocker.
Yes.
Yeah. From the time of the bank robbery to now is like 1 or 2 weeks or something. A week and a half, maybe.
Dang. Man, the time span, you really don't think about it that much. Until you sit down and like actively contemplate how little, like how much has been compacted in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Like that's so overwhelming. So I feel like thinking about how short a time there is, like I feel like it's an important piece of looking at these public memorials, because they haven't had the time to become a community space yet. You know, like they're still so like saturated with like the individual and like, or the original purpose of them.
Yeah. Like they are still in the aftermath. Yeah. It's not totally over. So this is actually a really great transition to one that is kind of constructed by the community, the time bubble. So
yes,
it's really interesting as a difference between the other two, because it was not intentionally made. It's a quote unquote natural memorial. And it's imperfect, and the surroundings had to be adapted to it. And at this point of the story that we're in, it's also been like constructed by the community as a memorial. A fence was erected, but just to describe it, because it was not taken care of until much later, right? During the aftermath, it was not. It couldn't be a memorial because it was still the city was still entirely flooded. It was still. They weren't out of that situation yet. So there's like dust and like garbage, like still floating in the air. But now there's visible efforts to reclaim it as a place of peace and remembrance, which kind of reflects that in the aftermath of the disaster, there was no time or attention paid to the deaths because everyone was focused on their own aftermath.
Trying to deal with everything. Yeah.
So then after things are starting to recover, the disaster at this point only finally starting to close, because we had Leviathan, and then we had the Slaughterhouse 9, and then we had Echidna. But now finally we have a moment of basically peace. We can now start remembering the past.
Oh, I'm terribly worried.
And we're going to...
I feel like every time there's a moment of calm, there's going to be something terrible around the corner.
With Wildbow stories, that's a good assumption. So the construction of the past that the memorial changes from essentially at any moment before it starts being reclaimed, it's essentially a mark of failure, right? It's just, a great thing to focus on here is that Dauntless, right, is trapped in it. And Dauntless was kind of like the city's hopes personified. They knew he was going to be their hometown hero. He's going to join the Protectorate. He's eventually going to become so powerful, and dashed to pieces. Potential lost. And they can still see it. They can see their former glory right there, but it's completely out of reach. But now it's kind of a sign that things can maybe get better. The dust can be cleared away, and we can just remember the good parts of the past. And while we won't have a Dauntless again, we can still get by. There's this petition, right, to cover the bubble in flower petals that is rejected in favor of viewing the past as it was, even though it's also a constructed view of the past. Remember, one of them is a villain, is a racist, is a Nazi. So thinking of this as like a real world thing, I would, if like I approached a memorial like this in real life, or if I lived in Brockton Bay, I would make an analysis that basically to keep the time bubble around for viewing is sort of a sign that the city's inhabitants have not truly moved on, or they're holding on to that glorified past. And they're still here, living still in that moment when Leviathan destroyed their homes. Yeah,
they're still operating like they are in the aftermath, in this sort of like, they haven't totally healed. Yeah.
So that is what I have on those three memorials, but I want to just touch on some other examples of just other places. So as a contrast to the time bubble, the scar, rather than being visible, is encased in a, quote, squat, windowless, zigzagging piece of architecture, which is sort of a declaration that, at least at this point in time, it is not worth remembering, which kind of makes sense. The only things in it are a dead crawler and a dead mannequin and a lot of really dangerous effects.
It doesn't have like a lot of radiation?
Yeah, radiation and probably I think some like fires that are like forever burning.
Oh my god.
It's all those Bogner bombs.
It's true. It's true.
Which is also what happened to those heroes, which is cool. So while some people did die in it, it's not constructed as a place of memory for like people who died to the Slaughterhouse 9. And actually, I don't know if there's a memorial for that, but there
I don't know. I feel
be.
like the cruelty of like the Leviathan is like a citywide emergency. You know.
Yeah.
capital E
it's
emergency.
one event.
Yeah, it's like an event.
Yeah.
But then like with the Slaughterhouse 9, it's something that's like, it's so much more like intimate a crime and like death, you know, because it's like they're so close up. Does that make sense?
No, for sure. And to me, it's also significant. It's a lot of little small moments. Like, does each particular mass murdering need its own memorial? I mean, in real life, like, anytime there's a massacre of that sort, like, you know, when he attacks the merchants, for example, or when they attack the merchants, it's not just Jack.
Yeah. He sort of like lets them loose.
You know, tons. Yeah. So tons of people die right there. Like, is that something to memorialize that moment? Or do we just do a memorial for like the ongoing weeks?
Yeah.
And then, you know, there's all those other people that died just generally in the aftermath of the city. Is this just an extension of that? Or do we just need like a memorial for...
Yeah, does it sort of like...
Leviathan deaths?
Does the Captain's Hill Memorial take
cover
on
that? Yeah.
the Leviathan plus everyone else? Like, plus the you know, extending aftermath.
Right.
Yeah.
When people skitters to territory, which I'm pretty sure is where the bubble is, when they go see the bubble, are they also remembering the people that Mannequin killed?
Yeah, it becomes less about like what is prescribed to be remembered and more about what people bring to it, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
And like once there is enough room or like time for the memorial space to take on more meanings, I feel like that's the immediate sort of next step, is like people taking their own public grief to like place. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we see little signs of people bringing their own things to it, where Taylor drops off flowers at the bubble, and we see that there was like a Dauntless poster, an action figure, and you wonder what did those items mean to those particular individuals, because it's not just like buy Dauntless, it's also buy my home, buy a city that wasn't wrecked by a giant monster. Yeah. So there's a lot of other places you could do analysis. You could, and not just as places of memory, you could just do architectural kind of analysis of like, what does it mean for Arcadia High to have all these hexagons, and in its windows, and the fact that it has like a Faraday cage and all these other things. What does that
and they
inflict upon the people who go there?
Building around the portal, don't they? Or like they build like a throwaway.
So they put a big white tent up first, and the implication is that more is being constructed. Yeah, it's interesting because they're like very deliberately creating like a secondary gateway, you know, to sort of like regulate. Oh, you mean like a gateway outside the gateway? Yeah, because they take on the, you know, ability to decide who gets to go in, who gets to go out. Right, because the portal doesn't have a lock. Yeah, basically. Yeah. So they're like building a door. And and if the PHQ, the floating headquarters that they had at the very beginning had lasted any longer, that would be worthy of analysis. I think you could definitely be like, the moment where it crashes on to the shores and this destroyed is just a moment where you kind of realize that the heroes can't keep you safe. The symbol of safety and defense is just demolished before the fight even begins. Yeah. And there's so many other places where you could do this sort of thing. I mean, you could analyze Taylor's home. You could analyze the Coil's base or Accord's base. I think actually would be a good one. Accord would be a good one to look at. Or you could analyze stuff in your own life. You can go to your school and look at the architecture and be like, what is this saying? What like not just like in the, you know, English major way, but like, what does it make you feel when you go into it? What roles does it enforce upon you? Yeah, like how does the space sort of like dictate how you operate and how you move and think about yourself? Like if you work in cubicles, right? Cubicles implicitly kind of tell you that you are one of many, that like you're, I mean, and there's like an implication they reinforce of surveillance. The message of, because the top is like all open. Is open. You like you are prohibited you may be watched from having the privilege of privacy. Yeah. Right. And so many others. So yeah, I hope that y'all can apply that to your own lives and maybe tell us anything that this has maybe helped you realize. But okay, that's all I have for my section, and we are now into the concluding area of the podcast. So we're going to go through our favorite powers. Then we're going to go into some themes and theories, some stuff that people have told us about, and then we'll close out. So, Clarence, what is your favorite power from arcs 18 through 22?
There was a lot of new ones, so it was very difficult to choose, which is why I chose Butcher, because there's so many.
Because it's so many.
Also just like the concept of like having so many minds in one head.
That's terrifying.
Is already like really interesting. And then it's like worsened by the very end where, you know, they're all sort of like stuck in this hellish cage with Cherish, you know? So it like, it just like exponentially increases the potential for her to leave and or escape.
Yeah. Yes. And or escape. Pretty dark. Yeah. Pretty dark.
But it's really fast. I don't know. It just seems like there's so like it'd have to be such a careful like collaboration between all of them. You know, like are they like
to not
bickering in the back of your mind? You're wandering around, you're like having a conversation with like 14 other people, or is it just like subtle nudges?
Are they all just like screaming?
Yeah, like how does that all fit together?
Yeah.
Very intriguing.
Do you think they ever just like, they're at the bottom of the ocean, like this is their situation. Do you think at some point they just like calm down? They're like, okay, anyone got any interesting stories?
Time for some tales.
Yeah, pass the time.
Did anyone know the wife of Bath?
Did
anyone know the wife of Bath?
I don't know that
from
story.
Chaucer. Yeah.
Oh. Well,
the Canterbury Tales. Because they're all like, they go on their little trip and everyone's like, you have to tell a tale if you're going to come with us.
Oh. That's a very clever reference, and I wish I'd gotten it.
No, it's okay. I didn't fully read the Canterbury Tales, so it doesn't really count.
That's very good. So, your analogy. Oh, well, I mean, a lot of it's not very interesting, but a lot of it is too. And so, okay, so you're basically saying that all of the as if in the Canterbury Tales, all of the voices go and tell their own individual story.
Yeah,
it kind of
the time.
Illustrates the theme. I would love to read that fan fiction. Someone please write that. That sounds fascinating.
What about yours? What's your favorite power this time around?
Mine is Accords, because it's just so fun to imagine these Rube Goldberg machines of death. I love it. I want to see him do the destruction of the Forbesberg gallery. Is that what it is? I think. The whole swinging thing. It's wonderful. His interlude is narrated by I think I know who it is, but I don't want to get it wrong. So a wonderful narrator who you should look up. And the way that he voices that one is like as he gets lost in his fantasies, essentially he just gets more and more like fast-paced and aggressive, and particularly the section where he describes the destruction of the Forbesberg gallery, it's just so fun because it's like, and then finally the pendulum will slice across and demolish this disgusting abomination of steel, bringing it all down in a resounding crash, and you can almost like hear the satisfaction in the chords voice of like finally this thing would be destroyed. So I want to see his power in action. That said, I would not want it at all.
I would not want to encounter him.
Yeah, me neither. Like, I would like to see his work post. I would like to see a video of it happening. It's just
I like that he likes order, and I like I'm not full of order.
That's the interesting thing is like if he if he did a thing with a bunch of dominoes, right? They wouldn't just fall over and fall over spectacularly. They would fall over and then all fall completely flat into an image or whatever for easy cleanup.
Of course.
So just a lot of fun. So let's go to themes and theories. I'm very excited
about this because there was some really, really good, fully fleshed out, literary responses and thought pieces, and there's a lot of good thinking that was happening.
Yeah. So on the last overview episode, I think is basically where most of these are. So let's start with Peta Enigma, who basically wrote an essay, which is a great read. I highly recommend it. Talking about gaps and basically black spaces in stories and how they affect readings, and he cites multiple readings, but the emphasis on basically when you see like the axe being raised and then you hear the scream, but you don't see the motion of the axe, it like puts you in that moment more than showing it would, because you have to directly imagine it. So
yeah, we sort of like fill in.
Yeah, and Arc 22 Cell is a great example of that, not only during the time that she's unconscious, but all the rest of the time when she has a limited view of the world. And like when Alexandria is leaving and coming back, we have this entire different construction of the world. And eventually, when we find out what the truth is, we come to that realization just as Taylor does, in this shocking manner, as everything is shaken back into place, which is like a great subversion of the effect of those blank spaces. Yeah.
I feel like that there were so many instances of that. Arc 22 is like a wonderful view of that, but I feel like particularly this book, actually I would say even like the last section that we read too, like both of them really kind of hinted at a lot of like flaps that were unflipped until we got to the end, you know, where we're sort of like going along for the ride and we're like kind of taking her narrative as truth, and we're like, yeah, this is totally what's happening, and like, oh my gosh, how could that happen? And then suddenly like everything makes sense. Yeah, because I don't know, we sort of just like buy into the unreliable narrator so readily, or perhaps maybe just I do, I don't know.
No, people do even more than we do. My first read through, there was no doubting Taylor's anything. All of her justifications were correct, much less her interpretations of reality.
Yeah, because I mean, you don't really start thinking about it until some of these later arcs. You don't really start thinking about it seriously, because before you're just kind of like, oh yeah. But you know, maybe she has some like specific opinions, but like we're not gonna totally discount. Like she's telling it like it is.
I mean, definitely when I first read the listing of all the counts, I was like, oh wait, she hurts people. Like it's that kind of realization of like, yeah, she's just been self-deceiving this whole time. But yeah, so that is a great essay. I highly recommend it. There's a lot more in there than we are talking about right here, and it's better argued and has a lot more sources. So go read that post by Peta Enigma. Yeah. So the next two are from Megafire 7, who does wonderful essays all the time. For We've Got Ward, they've also written a lot of really great essays on different characters. It's wonderful. But this one is basically about Brian and Taylor versus like Rue and Skitter as like identities that are dating as a pair, right? So Megafire's argument essentially starts off that they used to view them basically as like Taylor and Brian are not compatible. Yes.
Or that Taylor and Brian that they were really good for each other, but then Skitter and Gru were terrible.
But it was the other way around, right? In the end? Yeah,
well, because it gets so, like, the moments that they are, like, identifying with their, like, parahuman and, like, caped identity don't match up. Like, Brian embodies Gru much more in the beginning when he's sort of, like, trying to figure out how to be a leader, and then Taylor, you know, kind of bolsters that in the beginning, right? But then he sort of like is he hasn't really like sorted through his like emotional self, so he hasn't realized that romantic relationship until it's almost too late, because after that he kind of like goes through his, you know, second trigger, and like he loses that ability to like, you know, hold faith to his caped identity, because that security that he felt like was there is gone. And then Taylor sort of is like the flipped, where like before she wasn't fully like, you know, embodying her caped self, her like, you know, Skitter identity, until she kind of took over as the leader. And then by that point she was doing a huge amount of other things, and when he needed her to be, you know, emotional support and like put in,
when he needed her to be Taylor for Brian,
she was off doing Skitter things. Yeah. So they were just...
And he didn't feel like Gru, because Gru is the strong one. He's the badass with the motorcycle helmet, punching people in the face. But Brian is the one that is scared and traumatized, not only, you know, post Slaughterhouse 9, but before that too. Yeah. And yeah, that basically before she became leader, she used to like validate his sense of like being strong and masculine and all these other things, and like treating him like a leader, and but now she's a leader now,
and she doesn't need him to provide that. Yeah, it was really interesting reading of that. It
was really, really well argued. I highly recommend that people go read that one.
There's much more like detail, and it's much more fully fleshed out and articulated than how we're explaining it.
I think it's also more fun to read too. I enjoyed reading both of these. So the other one by Megafire 7 is something that they argued in the Discord, actually, post when we talk about the fights, I believe.
Yeah.
Basically imagining what it must be like to fight Taylor. And actually, I should go. I'll just go find it right now.
Yeah, it was really interesting, sort of like, because a lot of the moments that we get of other people's perspectives on her, especially with like the PRT, they're kind of like they have like they rank the Undersiders, right, in terms of like the threat level, that sort of thing, where they're like everyone's terrified of Regent, and then they're like Skitter is something that like is she's difficult to address or like capture, you know. So Megafire argues from Taylor's perspective, every battle is an underdog fight, because she has to constantly figure out how to defeat this particular opponent as they defeat her initial things, and it's constantly trying to trick people at the last second, right? And they emphasize that the thing about fighting Taylor is that she does not stop. You can never be sure that you have the actual upper hand, because she comes back from certain defeat all the time. Against Bakura, right? Cutting off her toes at the last second. Against Lung, literally like about to impale her and then caterpillar in the eye. Arms Master is holding her captured, and then she does a trick and she escapes again. Mannequin fakes her death again. Echidna again. She is standing in front of her, totally vulnerable, and that was a trap. Yeah. And Coil, where she like literally escapes the building, and then all of the
certain doom, completely certain doom.
He's like gone through every possibility.
Yeah. And so you can never be sure that you actually have beaten her, because she comes back from that all the time. So, and she's always like trying things, and that's where you have the defiant thing of just stop
trying things.
Just stop. Like, you lost. Just get over it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I wanted also I wrote in this little bit because I was thinking about it, and then I forgot to say something. When the discussion was like occurring, but she has a comment like when she's talking to Tag, where he's describing to her, she's describing it as like a game or something. They're like they're like opposition, and he's like, it's not a game, it's like a war of attrition, which seemed like a very notable thing of like this concept of he's just there to wear her down. And I mean, perhaps it's his like technique, but additionally it is 100% he's assessed the way that she operates, and has decided this war of attrition that will absolutely be like grueling is the best course of action.
Tactic, against her, which is interesting because that's her tactic, and in the negotiations you can see how they're totally opposite. So the last thing I want to mention with Megafire's thing, and it made me enjoy the scene even more. So with the cafeteria scene, right, she's surrounded by heroes, Dragon, Defiant, Clockblocker, so many others, and they're completely unwilling to approach her, even though all she's doing is just not turning herself in right at this moment. Like, they have her, she's in her civilian costume. She's in her civilian outfit. She doesn't have any gear on her. Basically. And then when they take a step towards her, she holds up her hand and they stop, because if they don't, what will happen? They don't know. She might slice them all up with Clockblocker's power or something. She's always done something. And that's where it has Clockblocker being like, oh shit, it's really her, because she smiles because she is caught, and they're terrified of her not actually being caught. So thank you for that Megafire, really good, and thank you Sebastian, because Sebastian helped out as well, adding some stuff. Wonderful read, and it makes me appreciate that scene so much more. So okay, that's it. That's our episode. That is our themes and theories, and we would love to hear more for our next perspective episode. So please send those in. Before we get to that, what's happening in Doof Media? Great question, Clarence.
You're welcome.
I'm so glad you asked. So the podcast I want to recommend this week is, of course, What to Say, our wonderful OC podcast. Analyzing, going through the episodes of the Orange County and their wonderful way that they do, Scott and Elise Daly. It's a joy to listen to and kind of get what's going on in their lives and things like that. So that's my recommendation. If you need just like something to pick you up and just chill out, I highly recommend that show. And the next thing is that next Friday, where we won't have an episode, right? We're going bi-weekly.
Fortnightly.
However, there's two wonderful things coming out. The Doof Book Club next Friday, which is going over the book, the first 15 Lives of Harry August by Catherine Webb. Given that there's a whole week after this episode comes out, if soon after this episode comes out, you go in and read it, I think you absolutely can finish it by the end of next week. Or perhaps you're already reading it. And then next Saturday
it's only
is...
about like 400 pages. Yeah.
Yeah. You have a whole week.
You could do that in a week.
Do it if you wanted to. And participating in the book club is really, really fun. I've enjoyed it every time. The Saturday after the one that the Saturday of next week, the same week that the book club comes out, is the Doof Game Club, which is going over the game The Outer Wilds, which probably would be hard to finish in a week, but I think it'll absolutely be worth watching if you're okay with being spoiled on a good game. So perhaps you don't play games very much, but you would like to see how one is constructed. Go catch the episode of the Doof Game Club. They are both recorded live at 9:30 p.m. on the respective days, and I think you can find a link to it. If you go to the Doof Media YouTube channel, you can find those when they come out. They are wonderful. I love participating in them. I love being there when they are recorded because you can ask questions and they respond and you can add to the discussion. And it's a really enjoyable time. So that's my recommendation. Very
nice. Well, also, in terms of Patreon, if you like, what we do here at Doof Media, you should consider donating $1 per month or, whatever else you can afford. Because, it's really good to, support monetarily these things. But additionally, it also, pays, hosting fees and, material things. And then, it provides the ability to, give back to the community with, fan art and other sorts of contests. And,
I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I think we might be doing a pale fan art contest sometime soon, one day.
Very exciting.
So finally,
wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just because there was a bunch of fan art contests for Ward, and now that Pale's been going on for a while, I expect one to happen soon. This is unofficial. I haven't actually been told anything.
So
but
perhaps unsupported anticipation.
There will be one. Unofficial word off the books, off the record, Pale fan art contest.
Well, there you go.
So you can go to patreon.com/doofmedia and see all the great Patreon rewards we have. I always forget to pick one. What's a good one? I always forget what I've plugged recently. We should probably start writing them down.
Yeah.
Well, at the $20 level, you get to sponsor an episode of the Doofcast, where you can pick a movie or short story for us to make a whole 2-hour episode on. Not guaranteed that it's 2 hours, but we talk a lot, so it almost always ends up that way. And if you want to, you can request certain people to be on it. So if you want me to be on an episode, if you want Clarence to be on an episode to talk about your favorite movie or short story, you can do that. You just add it in there. And then additionally, after you have your episode, as you continue on that Patreon reward level, you get to have a vote in the Doof Council. So you get to have a vote on one episode of the Doofcast per month, and also everyone gets to participate in this vote whether it goes into the Doof canon. So that's a really fun reward that is also available.
Such great power.
With great responsibility. Don't make Scott and Matt watch anime anymore, I am here. Jarvis and I are here. We like anime. You can ask us.
You have willing enthusiasts.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And there will be a bonus content for the $10 level Madoka Magica episode. Maybe 3 of them, maybe 1. I don't know yet. It's going to happen. It's in the works. I watched it recently. It's really good.
Is that an anime?
It's anime, yeah.
Was that the wrong article? Should it be the anime?
I think it's an anime. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I wish you enjoyment of that.
Thank you.
Yes. Also, please consider donating to Walbo's Patreon, because Walbo is the, like the author of all of these like great things that we read, and he relies on like the income, on this specific income to like make a living and continue producing, and he's like still writing, so we should definitely support him because supporting the arts is very important. Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's right. And of course, if you don't have any money for Patreon, we completely understand, but there are plenty of other ways to help us out. You can force a friend who is, having trouble being entertained right now to read Worm. Or, as I do it, because no one reads anymore, just start reading it to them until they're hooked. And then they have to read it. It's a foolproof plan. It's worked on. I bet it works sometimes.
I feel like this is like a car sort of scenario.
It's
like a car trip. If you're on a car trip and like they're the one driving, you might as well just read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they can't stop you. What, are they going to put their hand on your mouth? No, they're driving.
Dangerous.
They can't do that.
We're all about road safety here.
Exactly. And you can, of course, tell someone about this podcast or any of the other podcasts on the Doof Network. That helps all of us. We love more people hearing about us and just that we can entertain another person or make another person feel a little bit more knowledgeable. And of course, the other way is that you can leave us a rating and review on iTunes or the Apple Podcasts or whatever, or your favorite podcasting app. That helps us be found by other people and lets us be more legitimate. Also, it makes us more happy. So thank you. So if you have any questions for Clarence for the next section, which is arcs 23 through 26, you can leave that in the comments of this one. Or if you have any themes and theories, the same thing, leave it in the comments of this one or for the next episode. Now that we are fortnightly...
I mean, you can say bi-weekly.
We will actually... Okay,
whichever one you feel.
You corrected me once.
I'm sorry.
So I
was just offering new
Clarence.
options of words.
Thank you. I like
it's
having
like
a variety.
peppering along the semiological chain.
Yeah, that's... just like that. So now that we are bi-weekly, now that we have an episode every 2 weeks rather than every one, we now can read every comment before every episode rather than how we used to do. So so if you have any questions for Clarence, any themes and theories, you can leave them now. You can leave the next episode. Well, don't leave the questions for Clarence for next episode because that will be where we do the questions for Clarence. Or anything else you want to tell us. If you just want to, say hi, if you want to tell us something that we didn't do well, you can do it. Don't, it makes me sad. So don't, unless if it's very constructive. And you can also send us an email, which our email is decomposingpodcast@gmail.com. And of course, the other way is you can follow our Twitter at decomposingpod and find out all the announcements as they come out, which you'll probably get an announcement that this episode's coming out late because we're recording really late in the day and I'm going to take forever to edit it. So that's how you would have found out about that. Also, the DMs are open. I'd recommend you do that, but just theoretically, you could DM us. Don't, but you could. If you have to, you can. If you don't have an email or a Reddit account, but you do have a Twitter,
option.
Even the Twitter needs an email account, the last option, you can DM us. All right.
Yes. Well, so we shall see you in the week after next, or hear from you, or whatever. We'll be back to chat about the next four arcs: 23, 24, 25, 26. Yes, 4 arcs. I don't know why I had to count that out. That was horrible. Anyways, we shall see you then for the 5th installment.
Next episode is coming out August 7th.
So join us then as we cover arcs 23 Drone through 26 Sting.